Hey guys, tonight we embark on a curious journey, not through epic battles or grand speeches, but rather into the world of what Alexander the Great ate, and why it matters more than you probably think. Picture yourself standing on the sun-baked plains of ancient Macedonia, the air thick with the smell of dust and sweat, hearing the clatter of armor and murmurs of an army ready to march thousands of miles away from home. You might imagine the king dining on golden platters piled high with exotic foods, surrounded by servants fanning him with peacock feathers. But the truth is far more grounded, and honestly, quite a bit less glamorous. So buckle up, because you probably won't survive the reality check of what it took to keep the world's most ambitious conqueror and his massive army fed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where my fellow history explorers are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the shoes of Alexander, a young Macedonian prince raised on tales of heroes and gods, dreaming not just of ruling a kingdom, but of carving his name into eternity. But to do that, he needed to keep himself and his men alive, and that meant food, the gritty, indispensable fuel of conquest. Long before the thunder of hooves and the clash of swords, the daily reality was simpler, sometimes cruel. Where do you find enough food for an army on the move? It's a question historians still argue about, and it turns out that the answer is as much about geography and logistics as about royal appetite. You trudge alongside soldiers who carry not just weapons, but the burden of hunger and exhaustion. Their rations heavy with barley bread, dense, grainy, and about as exciting as chewing on old socks. This was their staple, providing calories in a compact, transportable form. Along with it, you find thick, hearty stews made from lentils and wild herbs simmered over open flames, more about sustenance than flavor. Meat was a rare luxury, usually goat or lamb, shared sparingly and prized by all. You overhear camp gossip suggesting Alexander sometimes dined on delicacies brought back from far-flung lands, dried dates from Persia, wild honey, exotic fruits. But whether these were regular meals or symbolic gestures remains uncertain. Such details, often romanticized or exaggerated in later stories, show how food was also part of the image Alexander cultivated. A warrior king, both approachable with his men and majestic to his subjects. Imagine the campfires at night, the smell of roasting meat mingling with dust and sweat, soldiers swapping tales of home foods, salted olives, figs dripping with sweetness, and fresh cheeses. These memories of home sustenance contrast sharply with the coarse reality of campaign fare. Yet food in the camp was more than nutrition. It was a communal ritual that forged bonds between men. You watch as soldiers chew on laurel leaves, believed to aid digestion and stamina, an ancient folk remedy you can't help but admire for its resourcefulness. Historians still debate whether such practices genuinely improved endurance or were simply a form of placebo comfort in harsh conditions. You catch whispers about Alexander's particular fondness for fish, caught fresh from the Euphrates, a detail that blurs the line between myth and fact, but highlights the personal nature of food amid grand history. Wine, heavily diluted to keep discipline intact, was a treasured beverage, serving more as a mild stimulant than a festive drink, a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos in the camp. Feeding an army across thousands of miles was a staggering logistical challenge. Food needed to be durable and portable, favoring dried and preserved items over fresh produce. The scarcity of fresh fruits and vegetables led to foraging, which sometimes caused illness due to unfamiliar plants or spoiled provisions. Medical officers struggled to maintain health with simple remedies, mixing honey and herbs to soothe stomach ailments, a humble testament to human resilience and ingenuity. As night deepened and fires crackled, the army's cooks worked tirelessly, crafting stews that, while bland, provided warmth and a semblance of home. Soldiers found fleeting joy in shared jokes over burnt bread, or guessing strange roots found. In the wild, humor a vital shield against the hardships of hunger and war. You notice the gradual introduction of foreign influences in the diet: Persian spices, Indian grains, and Central Asian dried fruits, foreshadowing the cultural mingling that would define the Hellenistic world. Under a vast canopy of stars, You feel the paradox of Alexander's campaign, the grandeur of empire weighed down by the simple, unglamorous reality of food. This was the engine of conquest, the sustenance of legends, and the reminder that even the mightiest have to eat to survive. You pack away your own rations, dried figs, a handful of nuts, watered wine, and steel yourself for the next day, carrying the taste of history on your tongue as the dust settles softly around your boots. Along the winding roads of Macedonia, the smells of fresh bread baking in village ovens tease your senses, a stark contrast to the coarse rations of the army camp. Villagers bring gifts to Alexander when he passes, sometimes baskets overflowing, with olives cured in salt, tangy cheeses wrapped in leaves, or fresh goat's milk. You imagine the taste of these simple pleasures and how they must have felt like treasures to a man constantly on the march. Such moments are fleeting, but they add a human layer to the great conqueror's legend. You recall the stories told by camp followers about Alexander's personal food preferences, how he supposedly favored figs and grapes, fruits symbolic of fertility and victory, thought to bolster strength and vitality. Yet historians still argue whether these tales are merely myths crafted to enhance his heroic image, or if they reflect genuine dietary habits. You also hear about peculiar medicinal foods, like crushed beetles used as poultices, or bizarre mixtures involving animal fats to heal wounds. The line between food and medicine is blurred, especially when survival hangs in the balance. Despite the hardships, Alexander's army is known to have adapted remarkably well, developing food storage techniques that allowed grains and dried meat to last months. They carried salted fish and smoked meats, preserving nutrition on long marches. The role of the army's quartermasters was crucial, orchestrating supply lines and trade with local populations, sometimes bartering weapons or treasures for food. The political dimension of food logistics cannot be overstated. Winning hearts, by feeding locals and soldiers alike, helped maintain morale and control over conquered territories. You think about the irony that while Alexander was known for his ambition to unite vast cultures, his own diet remained deeply Macedonian, relying on staples grown in his homeland's fields. Yet, as his campaigns moved eastward, these eating habits slowly blended with local cuisines, forming the early roots of Hellenistic culture. The introduction of spices from India, dried fruits from Persia, and new cooking techniques enriched the army's palate. Though not without occasional suspicion from purists, soldiers sometimes complained of unfamiliar tastes or questioned the safety of certain foods, sparking debates that echo through history about cultural exchange and resistance. At night, the campfire's flickering light reveals not just weary faces, but also the simple rituals that food inspired: songs, jokes, and prayers for a better meal tomorrow. Food becomes a language of hope and community, a thread weaving individual stories into the fabric of conquest. You remember reading that Alexander once insisted on dining with his troops rather than apart, breaking with royal tradition to foster unity. Whether motivated by genuine solidarity or tactical brilliance, this act speaks volumes about the role food played beyond mere sustenance. It was a tool of leadership, morale, and identity. As the stars wheel overhead and the army rests, you feel the pulse of history beating in your veins, the dusty roads, the meager rations, the taste of distant lands mingling with the familiar. Alexander's table, though humble in the field, is a microcosm of his empire, diverse, challenging, and forever changing. And you, marching alongside him, carry that story forward with every bite and every step. You rise with the dawn, the chill of morning wrapping around you like a thin, scratchy blanket, reminding you that even Alexander the Great had to face cold mornings far from the warmth of his palace. The rumble of horses and the murmurs of soldiers, stirring, fill the air, blending with the scent of damp earth and faint smoke from last night's dying fires. As you trudge alongside the army's march, you realize that Alexander's diet was not just about food. It was a complex balancing act of energy, culture, and symbolism that kept the entire operation moving forward, mile after mile. Imagine the weight on his shoulders, not just of command, but of ensuring that his men had enough to eat, that his body was fueled for the impossible feats ahead, and that his meals carried meaning beyond mere calories. Historians still argue whether Alexander's personal eating habits were dictated more by practicality or by a cultivated image of the ideal warrior king. But what's clear is that his food choices offer a window into the soul of his empire, and the daily realities of ancient warfare. Breakfast, such as it was, might consist of simple barley porridge, sweetened with a drizzle of honey harvested from wild hives, an ancient luxury that was worth more than gold in these harsh campaigns. The porridge, a dense, sticky mess, was far from the Instagram-worthy smoothie bowls you see today, but it provided slow-burning energy that soldiers desperately needed. The sweetness of honey was not just a flavor boost. It had medicinal qualities prized by ancient healers, believed to speed recovery and soothe sore throats after a day spent shouting orders and clashing swords. You catch a glimpse of Alexander, taking a small bite of dried figs, their wrinkled skins tough but chewy inside, bursting with a sugary tang that reminds him of the Mediterranean groves back home. There's something intimate about this moment, the conqueror sharing the same, humble fare as his men, a subtle but powerful symbol of unity. Yet you also notice that the general's table is never just about the basics. Exotic spices and preserved fruits, carried carefully in sealed jars, hint at the vast trade networks Alexander's conquest opened. Saffron, pepper, and cinnamon were rare and expensive, more than just flavorings. They were status symbols and diplomatic gifts, tokens of power exchanged between rulers. The complexity of these food items reflects the cultural fusion underway, as Macedonian staples mixed with Persian, Egyptian, and Indian ingredients, slowly transforming the very concept of what it meant to dine like a king. Lunch was often eaten, on the move, under the canopy of olive trees, or in dusty villages along the route. Soldiers tore into dense flatbreads stuffed with dried meat or salted fish, foods designed for portability and longevity. You imagine the crunch of crumbs falling on dirt, the shared grumbles about the monotony of rations, and the laughter sparked by a soldier who complains about having the culinary adventure of a lifetime, eating the same meal day after day. Such humor was a survival tool, a way to keep spirits high when the food was less than inspiring. The army's cooks were unsung heroes, adapting traditional recipes to the limitations of campaign life. They mastered the art of drying and salting meats, fermenting vegetables, and grinding grains into flour with crude but effective tools. You can almost hear the clatter of mortar and pestle echoing through the camps as they worked tirelessly to keep the food supply manageable. Historians still debate whether Alexander's logistical genius extended as deeply into food supply as it did into battlefield tactics, but the endurance of his army suggests that someone was doing something right. Dinners, when possible, were communal affairs around flickering campfires. The aroma of stews thick with lentils, onions, and wild garlic filled the air, a stark contrast to the sweetness of morning honey or the dryness of midday bread. Meat was rare and celebrated. Goat or wild boar hunted from the surrounding hills, roasted over open flames until tender and smoky. This was a luxury that boosted morale, a reward for long days of marching and fighting. You overhear conversations about local delicacies offered by conquered peoples, spiced rice from India, rich cheeses from Egypt, and preserved fruits from Persia. These exchanges weren't just about taste, but politics, a subtle diplomacy through food that helped Alexander forge alliances and assert dominance. The role of wine in Alexander's diet cannot be overstated. Unlike today's drinking culture, ancient wine was often diluted with water and consumed as a daily tonic rather than an intoxicant. It served as a disinfectant for water supplies and a morale booster after grueling days. You notice how the soldiers sip cautiously, aware that overindulgence could mean disaster on the battlefield. There's also an intriguing anecdote about Alexander himself enjoying a particular blend of wine infused with herbs and spices, believed to sharpen his mind and steady his nerves before crucial battles. This detail, part fact and part legend, underscores the blurred lines between practical sustenance and symbolic ritual in his eating habits. Amidst the campaign's hardships, Alexander's personal chefs reportedly devised creative dishes that combined local ingredients with Macedonian traditions. Think pomegranate seeds sprinkled over roasted lamb, or rice cooked with saffron and almonds. Such dishes were early examples of fusion cuisine, long before the term existed, and they reveal a man open to new ideas, even in the midst of conquest. You can't help but wonder how these culinary experiments were received by his soldiers. Hardened men used to simple fare. Did they embrace these tastes or dismiss them as foreign oddities? It's a question historians still explore. Medical, knowledge intertwined closely with food. You learn that Alexander's camp included healers who prescribed specific diets to injured or ill soldiers, broths rich in bone marrow to rebuild strength, honey mixtures to fight infections, and herbal teas to calm fever. These early forms of nutritional therapy were rudimentary but effective, a testament to the ingenuity of ancient medicine. The blend of food and healing practices reminds you that survival in Alexander's world required more than just brute strength. It demanded knowledge, adaptation, and care. As night falls and you settle near the fire, you reflect on how Alexander's food choices were a microcosm of his empire, rooted in tradition but ever evolving, blending practicality with symbolism, nourishment with politics. You realize that every bite taken by the great conqueror and his men carried with it the weight of history, culture, and survival. From the simplest barley bread to the rarest spices, their meals tell a story of endurance, ambition, and the human need to connect, even in the harshest conditions. As you close your eyes under a canopy of stars, the lingering taste of honey and roasted meat reminds you that history is not just about kings and battles, but about the everyday acts, eating, sharing, surviving, that make us all human. You awaken before dawn, the faint chill in the air mixing with the scent of crushed herbs and smouldering ashes as the camp slowly stirs to life. Today, your thoughts linger on the surprisingly crucial role of animals in Alexander the Great's campaigns. Not just the towering war horses or the camels that carried supplies, but the animals that ended up on the table, shaping not only survival, but also the cultural exchanges within the vast empire. You trudge alongside Alexander's retinue, who depend heavily on their horses, revered not just for speed or strength, but for their symbolic status. Bucephalus, Alexander's famous steed, is almost a legend himself, said to have been tamed by the young prince and carried him through countless battles. But beyond the cavalry, livestock like sheep, goats, and cattle formed the backbone of the army's food supply, grazing near campsites, providing fresh meat, milk, and cheese. The logistics of caring for these animals while on the move were staggering, and historians still argue whether Alexander's forces managed this better than other ancient armies, or if they struggled continuously with shortages and disease. You watch as herders move flocks along dusty trails, their weary calls blending with the clinks of armor and murmurs of strategy. The animal's health was critical. A sick or starving horse could mean disaster in battle, while the loss of livestock directly threatened the army's food reserves. The Macedonians developed clever methods to preserve meat, such as drying and smoking, to ensure that the spoils of hunts or the animals slaughtered for food could last for weeks. This preservation was vital, considering the unpredictable nature of supply lines stretching thousands of miles from home. Imagine the taste of dried meat, tough and chewy, flavored only by salt and smoke, a far cry from the succulent roasts of palace feasts, but indispensable for survival. You overhear camp gossip about peculiar culinary customs encountered during the campaigns, like the Scythians' tradition of fermenting mare's milk into a mildly intoxicating drink called kumis, which some soldiers found invigorating while others approached it with suspicion. Such experiences highlight how food was also an education, exposing Alexander's men to foreign practices that challenged their palates and perceptions. The exchange wasn't one-sided. Alexander's army introduced their own culinary staples to conquered regions, influencing local diets and trade patterns. For instance, the spread of barley and wheat cultivation in Central Asia is linked to the Macedonian presence, forever altering the agricultural landscape. Beyond food, animals played spiritual and tactical roles. Horses were not just beasts of burden, but symbols of status and divine favor. Alexander's close bond with Bucephalus was emblematic of his leadership and valor. Soldiers believed that the health and courage of their mounts directly impacted battle outcomes, so care and reverence for animals intertwined with superstition and morale. You catch a glimpse of ritual sacrifices made before battles, where animals were offered to gods in hopes of securing victory, a practice both religious and practical, as the meat was consumed afterward, sustaining the troops. These rituals reinforced group identity and psychological readiness, vital components in the chaos of war. Yet caring for animals amid constant marching and skirmishes was fraught with challenges. Disease outbreaks among livestock could devastate food supplies and slow the army's advance. Veterinary knowledge was rudimentary, relying on herbal remedies and folk wisdom. You learn of treatments involving poultices made from crushed herbs, and even snake venom applied carefully to wounds. A risky business that speaks to the improvisation required to keep animals alive. Historians still debate the effectiveness of such treatments and how much the Macedonians' animal care influenced their military successes. The presence of pack animals like donkeys and camels also shaped the campaign's logistics. These creatures carried heavy loads of food, weapons, and personal belongings, enabling the army to travel further and faster. Their endurance was legendary, but also a limiting factor. The army's speed was often dictated by the slowest animals, forcing commanders to balance ambition with practicality. In desert regions, camels were indispensable, able to traverse arid terrain where horses struggled, while in mountainous areas, sure-footed mules were preferred. This adaptability in animal usage reflects Alexander's strategic flexibility and the practical challenges of conquering diverse landscapes. You reflect on the social implications. Herders and animal handlers were often among the lower ranks, yet their role was critical, their expertise quietly sustaining the army's might. Their knowledge of animal behavior and care was a specialized skill passed down through generations, sometimes clashing with the soldiers' more straightforward martial focus. This dynamic created a complex social hierarchy within the camp, where survival depended on the cooperation of many roles beyond the battlefield. As evening falls, the smell of roasting meat fills the air once again, this time tinged with the smoky sweetness of fat dripping onto embers. Around the fire, soldiers share stories of hunts and encounters with wild beasts, bears, boars, even crocodiles, some tales bordering on the mythical. These stories serve as both entertainment and caution, reminding the men of the dangers lurking beyond the lines and the thin margin between life and death. You listen to a grizzled veteran recounting a narrow escape from a charging wild boar, the vivid description making you wince and wonder how much courage versus luck it took to survive such encounters. Food, animals, and survival were deeply intertwined in Alexander's world, each bite and each beast carrying significance far beyond the immediate. The army's diet was shaped by necessity and opportunity, reflecting the vast cultural mosaic of the empire in the making. Exotic spices mingled with humble grains, wild game shared with domesticated livestock, and the spiritual rituals tied to animals all paint a picture of a world where conquest was as much about adaptation as domination. You tuck into your own meager meal, the flavors reminding you of stories told by camp followers about Alexander's penchant for surprising his men with unexpected delicacies. A roasted lamb stuffed with figs here, a bowl of spiced rice there. These moments of indulgence, rare and treasured, broke the monotony of campaign life and reinforced bonds among the soldiers. Whether these anecdotes are fully accurate or embellished over time, they highlight the human side of history, the desire for comfort, celebration, and connection, even amid hardship. You finish the day's march with a quiet appreciation for the animals that sustained the army and the complex network of care and tradition that made such a vast campaign possible. As stars emerge overhead, you feel the weight of countless untold stories, the footsteps of horses, the crackle of campfires, the shared meals that fueled a world-changing journey. It's a reminder that history's grand narratives are built not only on kings and battles, but on the humble lives intertwined. With animals, food, and survival in an ancient world, you trudge through the morning mist, the cold air biting gently at your cheeks as you join the bustling camp, where Alexander's army prepares for another day of conquest. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingles with the faint tang of sweat and animal musk, an olfactory reminder that even the mightiest conqueror's existence depended on simple, everyday necessities like food and shelter. As you weave through tents and soldiers, you start pondering the role of food beyond sustenance in Alexander's campaigns, how what he ate wasn't just fuel, but a tool of power, diplomacy, and identity. You realize that behind every meal lay a complex web of political symbolism and cultural exchange, a fact historians still debate fiercely. Did Alexander use food as a weapon to win hearts, or was it simply a reflection of the era's norms? Either way, his dining table was a stage where empire building played out as much as on the battlefield. Imagine a feast laid out under a vast Persian tent, a mosaic of dishes from across the known world, roasted meats, fragrant rice, exotic fruits, and rare spices that whispered stories of distant lands. These banquets were not casual affairs, but carefully orchestrated events designed to impress and intimidate, power projected through abundance and taste. Alexander's personal meals blended Macedonian traditions with local customs, a culinary metaphor for his vision of a unified empire. You can almost see him reclining on cushions, sharing dishes with Persian nobles, using food to bridge cultural divides and demonstrate respect, even as he solidified his dominance. But not all meals were sumptuous feasts. The daily fare of ordinary soldiers contrasted sharply with the king's table, consisting mainly of barley, dried meats, and whatever could be foraged or traded. You hear murmurs among the troops complaining about the monotony and scarcity, highlighting the hardships behind the glory. These differences expose the social hierarchies even within the army, a reality often glossed over in grand histories. The preparation and sharing of meals fostered camaraderie and morale. Simple acts like breaking bread together became rituals of unity and resilience. You note how cooks had to be resourceful, turning limited ingredients into sustaining meals under challenging conditions. Sometimes, food shortages led to desperate measures, forcing soldiers to eat wild plants, or even animals not typically considered food. Such episodes remind you that survival often trumped preference, and you can almost taste the bitterness of the unknown greens or the toughness of a hastily caught rabbit. Among the more curious anecdotes is the use of honey as a natural preservative and medicine, a sticky sweetener with antibacterial properties that ancient armies prized. Alexander reportedly carried jars of honey not just to sweeten his meals but also to treat wounds and soothe sore throats, a dual purpose that blends nutrition with early medical practice. This connection between food and health underscores a holistic approach to survival that modern armies would only rediscover millennia later. The role of wine also deserves mention, not just as a drink, but as a symbol of civilization and power. Diluted with water to avoid intoxication, wine was a staple that marked status and ritual. You overhear debates among camp philosophers about whether Alexander's wine consumption was more about pleasure or practicality. Some suggest his famous Last Supper before battles included special blends infused with herbs to calm nerves and sharpen focus. Though these stories mix fact with legend, you imagine the king sipping carefully, aware that even a moment's weakness could alter the course of history. Interestingly, you learn that Alexander's campaigns accelerated the spread of certain foods and culinary techniques. The introduction of Greek and Macedonian staples into conquered lands, combined with local traditions, created a fusion cuisine centuries ahead of its time. For example, the blending of Persian rice dishes with Macedonian meats, or the adoption of new spices from India enriched the dietary landscape. These food exchanges weren't just practical, but symbolic, representing the mingling of cultures that Alexander sought to achieve. The army's reliance on local food sources also meant adapting to unfamiliar ingredients and cooking methods, a challenge that tested both cooks' skills and soldiers' palates. There are amusing reports of soldiers balking at strange dishes, such as fermented fish sauces or spiced lentils, sometimes joking about the exotic torture of new tastes. Yet over time, these culinary adventures became part of the shared experience, bonding men from diverse backgrounds through food. You also consider the role of food in ceremonies and religion. Sacrifices of animals before battle, offerings to gods, and communal meals after victories reinforced the spiritual dimension of conquest. These rituals provided psychological comfort and a sense of order amid chaos, reminding soldiers of higher powers guiding their fate. The careful selection and preparation of sacrificial animals showed reverence and hope, intertwining food with faith. As night descends and campfires flicker, you sense that food in Alexander's world was never just about survival. It was a language of power, culture, and humanity. The meals, from humble barley cakes to lavish feasts, tell a story of an empire constantly in motion, shaped by conquest, exchange, and adaptation. You close your eyes imagining the crackling fires, the clink of cups, and the shared smiles around tables far from home, a quiet counterpoint to the thunder of hooves and clash of swords. History, you realize, is as much about what people ate, and how they ate it as about the kings and battles that make the headlines. You rise early, the faint pink glow of dawn barely touching the horizon as the camp stirs to life once again. The smell of damp earth and faint smoke from last night's fire mixes with the sharp scent of roasted grains and brewing herbal teas, grounding you in the sensory world of Alexander's army. Today, your mind turns to the strange and fascinating rituals surrounding food preparation, an overlooked but vital part of the campaign's daily rhythm. While it might seem mundane, these rituals carry deep meaning, blending practicality, superstition, and social order in a way that historians still argue about. Were they purely functional, or did they also serve as psychological tools to prepare soldiers for the uncertainty ahead? Picture the camp's cooks, a band of specialists moving with practiced efficiency, slicing dried meats, grinding grains, and stirring bubbling pots over open flames. Their work was more than mere survival. It was a carefully choreographed performance that maintained morale and cohesion. You notice the use of specialized tools, stone grinders for flour, woven baskets for carrying ingredients, and clay pots that retain heat well. Simple technologies that made all the difference in the harsh conditions. These cooks were unsung heroes, mastering the art of transformation, turning raw ingredients into edible sustenance, sometimes under fire or at the mercy of weather. The army's diet was surprisingly varied thanks to local foraging and trade, incorporating wild herbs, fruits, and occasionally hunted game. This variety not only prevented nutritional deficiencies, but also introduced flavors that broke the monotony of campaign food. You might grimace imagining chewing on tough jerky day after day, so these little tastes of freshness were a psychological boost. The preparation methods often involved drying, salting, and fermenting, techniques inherited from various cultures within the empire. Fermentation was particularly valued for preserving grains and dairy products, enabling longer storage and reducing the risk of spoilage. The Macedonians learned these from conquered peoples, illustrating how conquest was also a two-way street of cultural exchange. You overhear a cook explaining how they sometimes add wild garlic or cumin to dishes, both to enhance flavor and to aid digestion. These herbs, now commonplace in your kitchen, once carried exotic reputations and practical medicinal uses. For instance, cumin was believed to prevent stomach ailments, a boon on long marches. Another quirky tidbit involves the use of crocodile dung as a kind of sunscreen or medicine among some local tribes Alexander encountered, a fact that may sound gross now, but exemplifies the wide range of practices soldiers witnessed. Soldiers were often skeptical, but sometimes adopted these customs when desperate or curious. You also reflect on the social aspects of food preparation. The camp was divided into units, each responsible for its own meals, but communal cooking areas fostered interaction and cooperation. Preparing food together was a daily ritual that built camaraderie and broke down social barriers, crucial in an army made up of diverse ethnicities and backgrounds. Yet despite this cooperation, the distribution of food also reinforced hierarchies. Officers and nobles enjoyed better provisions and more variety, while common soldiers made do with rations. This inequality sometimes bred resentment, but was accepted as part of military discipline. Occasionally, soldiers would share their extra rations or trade for delicacies brought back from conquests, creating informal economies within the camp. These exchanges highlight the human side of warfare, friendships, bartering, and small acts of kindness amidst hardship. You ponder the logistical marvel of feeding tens of thousands daily, moving through remote regions where supplies were scarce and unpredictable. Alexander's quartermasters had to plan meticulously, balancing speed, supply availability, and the army's health. They carried staple foods in large quantities, but relied heavily on local procurement, a strategy fraught with risk. Food shortages could delay campaigns or weaken troops, making provisioning as critical as weaponry. The use of supply caravans, pack animals, and local markets created a complex network of sustenance, sometimes disrupted by hostile forces or natural obstacles. You also consider the psychological impact of food scarcity. Hunger and malnutrition sapped morale and physical strength, while the promise of a hearty meal after battle fueled motivation. Victory was often celebrated with lavish feasts, reinforcing bonds and rewarding bravery. But these moments were fleeting. The harsh realities of campaign life always lurked nearby. You imagine a soldier craving simple comforts, a warm stew, fresh bread, or even just clean water, while marching through foreign lands, far from family and familiarity. Finally, you think about how these food preparation rituals and culinary habits echo in modern military practices. The emphasis on nutrition, hygiene, and morale through shared meals remains central, linking past and present in unexpected ways. As you settle down under the fading light, the sounds of chopping, boiling, and laughter drift through the camp, a reminder that amid conquest and chaos, the simple act of preparing and sharing food remains a universal human experience, binding individuals into communities, sustaining bodies and spirits alike. You find yourself waking slowly as the soft glow of dawn creeps through the tent's fabric, the camp already stirring with the low hum of voices, clinking gear, and the faint crackle of smouldering embers. Today, your thoughts wander not toward the roar of battle or the sweep of conquered lands, but toward a more grounded yet fascinating question. What exactly did Alexander the Great eat during his long, grueling campaigns? This is not just idle curiosity. Understanding his diet gives you a glimpse into how a man, who seemed almost superhuman in his conquests, managed to sustain his body and mind through months, even years, of relentless marching and fighting. Historians still argue whether his food choices reflected his Macedonian roots, or if they evolved significantly during his travels across Persia, Egypt, and India. But one thing's clear: his meals were a critical part of keeping his legendary energy alive. You imagine the early Macedonian fare, simple, hearty, and utilitarian. Barley, for instance, was the cornerstone of his diet. It was not the polished wheat bread you're used to, but a coarse, dense loaf made from barley flour, baked over open flames or in rudimentary stone ovens. This bread was a constant companion, providing sustained energy that soldiers and commanders alike relied on during grueling marches. You can almost taste the nutty, slightly bitter crumb, dry but filling, perfect for pairing with anything from olives to preserved cheese. Lentils and chickpeas too played their part, simmered into thick, protein-rich stews that could be made with whatever herbs and spices were at hand. Dill, coriander, and wild thyme were favorites that you probably wouldn't find in a modern supermarket, but were abundant in the Mediterranean wilds. These stews were a staple, especially when fresh meat was scarce, offering warmth and sustenance with minimal fuss. Speaking of meat, imagine the smoky, savory aroma wafting through the camp as whole lambs or goats slowly roasted over an open fire, their fat sizzling as it dripped into the glowing embers. Meat was highly prized and often reserved for celebrations or special occasions. But whenever the opportunity arose, whether through hunting or requisitioning from local populations, it was eagerly devoured. Fish, especially near rivers and coasts, was another key protein source. Salted or fresh, fish brought much-needed variety to the soldiers' plates. Interestingly, despite his many tastes, Alexander reportedly had an aversion to onions, which might surprise you given how common onions were in ancient cooking. Scholars debate whether this dislike was a personal quirk, a medical precaution, or something else entirely. You probably wouldn't expect wine to play a major role in a military diet, but it was ubiquitous. The Macedonians and Greeks never drank wine neat. They always diluted it with water, a custom that seems odd now, but was intended to prevent drunkenness and extend hydration. Picture soldiers carefully mixing their wine with river water, trying to find the right balance between taste and temperance. Tales of Alexander's legendary drinking bouts exist, but tend to be exaggerated. More likely, his consumption was measured, following the social norms of his time. Wine wasn't just a drink, but a social lubricant and a symbol of camaraderie, used in toasts that bonded soldiers and leaders alike. Honey deserves a special mention as well. Far more than just a sweetener, honey had medicinal uses, used to dress wounds and soothe sore throats. It blurred the line between food and medicine in ancient times. Drizzled over bread or stirred into drinks, it was a prized luxury and an essential health aid in the field. Spices like cumin, saffron, and coriander also hint at the vast trade networks Alexander's conquests opened up, while common herbs flavored everyday dishes. Rare spices marked status and wealth, underscoring the mingling of cultures in his growing empire. Feeding an army of tens of thousands was a logistical nightmare. Quartermasters had to balance finding fresh supplies with maintaining good relations with local populations, a difficult task, especially when food was scarce or hostile. You imagine the tense moments when rations ran low, hunger gnawed at soldiers, and commanders scrambled to secure enough provisions to keep the campaign moving forward. Food shortages could stall entire operations, reminding you that no matter how brilliant a general might be, an army marches on its stomach. You also catch glimpses of the human side of this history. Soldiers sharing what little they had, feasting, under the stars after a long day's march, and the small comforts that food provided amidst the chaos of war. Alexander himself seems less like a myth and more like a man grappling with exhaustion, hunger, and the same bodily needs as everyone else, despite the godlike legends that surround him. His meals were moments of respite and solidarity, fuel not just for the body, but for the spirit of conquest. You awake to the soft rustle of the camp settling into morning, the scent of earth mingling with faint hints of smoky embers from last night's fire. Today, your journey follows Alexander the Great's daily habits beyond just his meals. Those rhythms that sustained his mind and body while he pushed his armies across continents. His routine wasn't just about conquest, but about mastering himself amid chaos. Historians still argue whether these routines were born from sheer discipline or something deeper, perhaps spiritual or psychological, driving a man who seemed incapable of rest. Imagine him rising early, the dawn barely breaking, slipping quietly from his tent while the camp sleeps, eager to seize the day ahead. Physical training was paramount. Wrestling, archery, horseback riding, the very actions that kept him in peak shape to lead charges or wield his sword with precision. You picture his strong hands steadying the reins of Bucephalus, the fierce stallion who was more companion than mount, their bond legendary, forged through trust and countless battles. Alexander's sleep was never luxurious. Campaigns meant stolen hours, naps between skirmishes, a few moments snatched under a tree or beside a fire. You imagine the weariness settling into his bones, yet his mind stayed alert, always plotting the next move. Despite the exhaustion, he maintained moments of meditation and reflection, times when the world slowed just enough for him to gather his thoughts. The sleep patterns of Alexander contrast sharply with modern ideals. They were fragmented, driven by necessity rather than comfort, a testament to the grueling life of a military leader on the move. What about his eating schedule? Forget the idea of 3 square meals. Alexander ate when he could, often irregularly. His diet was practical: fruit, nuts, simple breads, lean meats. But on occasion, grand feasts erupted to celebrate victories or cement alliances. These gatherings were more than just food. They were theatrical displays of power and culture, featuring music, poetry, and storytelling, turning dining into a tool of diplomacy. You might find it curious that Alexander sometimes fasted, abstaining from food for reasons that remain debated by scholars. Was it spiritual discipline, a tactical move to prepare for battle, or a demonstration of self-control? Whatever the reason, it added layers to the man beneath the myth. Alexander's personal habits were a blend of Macedonian austerity and the lavishness of the cultures he conquered. In Persia, he adopted royal customs, wearing luxurious robes, and enjoying exotic foods, melding his Spartan roots with newfound opulence. He also engaged in superstitious rituals, consulting oracles, interpreting dreams, and observing omens, a reminder that even great men wrestled with doubt and fate. You picture him sharpening his sword at dawn or reciting prayers, habits that humanize the legendary figure. His lifestyle wasn't only about personal gain, but setting an example. His soldiers mirrored his discipline and resolve, drawn not merely by orders, but by loyalty to a leader who embodied their shared ambition. The combination of relentless physical exertion, sharp intellect, and rituals of both body and spirit forged an aura that kept his empire moving forward, even in the harshest conditions. As the sun climbs higher, you see Alexander not just as a conqueror, but as a man whose habits sculpted history, whose daily choices echoed in the lives of thousands, and whose human rhythms continue to captivate centuries late. You settle in once more as the day matures, your mind tracing Alexander's journey through the cultural kaleidoscope of his empire, not just the battles and politics, but how food and drink revealed the complex fusion of traditions he encountered. By now, Alexander's diet was no longer simply Macedonian barley and meat. It had evolved into a culinary tapestry woven from Persian spices, Egyptian breads, and Indian delicacies. This blending wasn't just about taste, but a strategic embrace of diversity that mirrored his political ambition to unify vastly different peoples. Historians still debate whether this cultural assimilation was genuine respect or calculated pragmatism, but the meals themselves became a symbol of the empire's growing complexity. Imagine a feast laid out under a giant tent near the banks of the Euphrates, platters of roasted pheasant spiced with cumin and coriander, bowls brimming with lentils simmered in rich broths, and fragrant flatbreads baked fresh on hot stones. Wine flows freely, diluted as per Greek custom, punctuated by bursts of laughter and music played on lyres and flutes. Servants glide silently, offering honeyed dates and nuts, treats that were both nourishing and luxurious. You might chuckle to think that Alexander, the warlord who once lived off the land, now dined like royalty with foods from across continents, each bite a reminder of the empire he forged. Yet, despite this lavishness, there remained an undercurrent of practicality. Food had to sustain armies and embolden spirits, not just impress guests. One quirky tradition you might not expect: Alexander was known to eat with his hands, a practice common in many cultures but notably practical during campaigns where utensils were scarce or impractical. This tactile connection to food underscored a grounded leadership style, even amidst extravagance. It also reveals something intimate about ancient dining. Meals were sensory experiences engaging more than just taste. The feel of warm bread, the scent of spices, the sound of sizzling meat all contributed to a moment of human connection amid the harshness of conquest. The logistics of feeding a multi-ethnic army, tens of thousands strong, were staggering. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles, reliant on local resources, caravans, and the goodwill or resentment of conquered populations. There were moments of scarcity when hunger gnawed at morale, and commanders had to improvise, trading goods, rationing food, or even resorting to foraging in hostile territory. You can almost feel the tension as Alexander's officers scramble to secure provisions while keeping the army's momentum. It's a reminder that behind the glory lies the grind of survival, and that no campaign, however brilliant, could thrive without food. A fringe yet fascinating detail involves the medicinal use of certain foods and herbs. Alexander's physicians carried concoctions blending honey, garlic, and various plants believed to boost stamina or heal wounds. You might find it curious that garlic, though pungent, was prized as a health tonic, its sharp bite a small price for the promise of vitality. Scholars still argue whether these remedies truly aided soldiers, or if their power lay mainly in the mind's belief, a kind of placebo effect that kept men fighting through exhaustion. You also consider how Alexander's dietary choices shaped his image. He projected strength and moderation, rejecting gluttony while savoring the pleasures of food. His restraint was a message to his troops and allies, reinforcing discipline without denying the human need for comfort. The shared feasts weren't just celebrations but rituals that built trust and unity, essential in an empire sprawling across unfamiliar lands. Through the lens of food, you glimpse the delicate balancing act of power, culture, and survival that defined Alexander's reign, an empire not only conquered by sword, but by the subtle art of shared tables. You find yourself, once again, in the dusty confines of a Macedonian camp, where the faint scent of smoke from a dying fire lingers in the cool evening air. The twilight shadows lengthen across the rugged hills, and you trudge over scattered stones, toward a small cluster of tents where the remnants of the day's rations are being distributed. Tonight the menu is modest, again, but the story behind it stretches far beyond the simple bowl in your hands. You hold a rough pottery cup filled with a thin, sour mixture called posca, a kind of diluted vinegar water that soldiers swore by to stave off sickness, even if it left their tongues puckering and their breath less than pleasant. You sip it anyway, because it's better than plain water, which is often muddy or scarce. Around you, the low murmur of voices swap stories about Alexander's latest campaigns, but your mind drifts to the peculiar question of how food shaped this young king's legendary march to the edges of the known world. You chew on a piece of coarse barley bread, its dryness scraping against your teeth, and consider how this humble diet fueled a man who by now commands vast armies, has toppled empires, and faces the whispers of gods and kings alike. Historians still argue whether Alexander's personal preference for simple fare was a deliberate act of solidarity or sheer necessity in harsh, mobile campaigns. Some claim he maintained a Spartan diet, equal to his men, to foster loyalty, while others suggest he indulged in richer meals behind closed doors. Either way, his soldiers mostly ate what you now have: barley, lentils, dried fish, wild herbs, and occasionally salted meat that could double as shoe leather. It's far from the exotic feasts you might imagine a world conqueror enjoying. But then again, survival in foreign lands rarely offers luxury. The campfire crackles, casting a warm glow on faces tired from days of marching and skirmishing. One veteran tells you a curious tale. Alexander once refused to eat anything brought by a local chieftain because he suspected it was poisoned, demanding his own cooks prepare food he trusted. Whether this story is true or just another legend is up for debate, but it shows the precarious balance between diplomacy and danger at these tables. You bite into a small wedge of goat cheese, its sharp tang cutting through the monotony of starch and gruel, and think about how nutrition was as much about practicality as pleasure. Preserving food on long campaigns meant drying, salting, or fermenting to avoid spoilage, techniques that gave the rations their distinctive, sometimes unpleasant flavors. Interestingly, there's a fringe theory among scholars that Alexander's army may have consumed fermented mare's milk, known as kumis, in some regions, a beverage credited with medicinal properties and invigorating qualities, although the evidence is patchy at best. You watch a group of men passing around a flask of watered wine, the same old ritual, and overhear them joking about the fine dining back home. Fresh fish from the Aegean, olives pressed that morning, figs sweet as honey. Such luxuries feel worlds away from the dried roots and tough bread in your hands. Yet these simple ingredients sustained an army that marched thousands of miles across deserts, mountains, and rivers, through heat and cold, hunger and fatigue. You recall hearing about the legendary Alexandrian feast in later years, lavish, banquets with roasted peacocks and spiced wines. But for now, that's just a dream in the camp's smoke-filled air. Around you, the soldiers tell bawdy stories, sharing laughter, despite the hunger gnawing at their bellies, and you find comfort in this strange camaraderie. Someone points out a nearby firefly blinking faintly, and you think about the contrast between these quiet moments and the chaos of battle that looms ahead. The diet of these men was about endurance, not delight, about making it through tomorrow, not indulging in extravagance. Yet, as you gnaw on the last crust of bread and sip your sour wine, there's a strange kind of poetry in it all, the taste of history itself, gritty and real. It makes you wonder how much of what we know about Alexander the Great is wrapped in myths of glory and feasts, while the truth lies in these humble, often harsh meals shared under starry skies. You wrap your cloak tighter against the night chill and think about the open debates among scholars. Did these dietary hardships shape Alexander's temperament, his decisions, his legendary stamina? Or was he simply a man who accepted hardship as part of destiny? Whatever the truth, you feel a connection to those ancient soldiers, sharing their meager meal, their stories, their dreams, all washed down with a rough, sour wine that tastes of endurance and survival. And as the fire burns low, your thoughts drift toward the next day's march and the distant lands still waiting to be conquered. The food may be simple, the company rough, but here, in this moment, you are part of something immense. A story written not in gold or silk, but in breadcrumbs, sweat, and the persistent hope for victory. As dawn breaks, you awaken to the low murmur of activity in the camp. The air is crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of damp soil and burning wood. You roll out of your thin bedroll and stretch your stiff limbs, knowing that today, like every day in this relentless campaign, food will be both fuel and fleeting comfort. Breakfast is another simple affair. More barley bread, dry and crumbly, paired with a bitter herb infusion that the camp healer swears keeps the soldiers' stomachs steady on long marches. You bite into the bread, its rough texture scraping the inside of your mouth, but you welcome the familiarity. As you eat, your mind wanders back to the vast territories Alexander has crossed, from the rugged hills of Macedonia to the deserts of Persia and beyond. With every step, the logistics of feeding an army of thousands become increasingly complex. You overhear officers discussing the challenges of supply lines stretched thin across hostile terrain. Fresh food is a rare luxury, often replaced by salted meats and hardtack that last for weeks, even months. Despite these hardships, Alexander's soldiers show remarkable resilience. Their rations may be meager, but the army's morale is buoyed by tales of glory, the camaraderie of shared hardship, and the knowledge that they follow a leader with almost mythical status. You take a moment to observe the camp's bustle, the cooks stirring large cauldrons of lentils, men sharpening weapons, others tending to horses. It strikes you how much of this daily life revolves around managing limited resources efficiently. Water, often scarce, is rationed carefully. Wine is diluted. Meat is preserved with salt or dried in the sun. This practical approach to sustenance contrasts sharply with the grand banquets you've read about in history books, painting a truer picture of what life on campaign was really like. At midday, the sun climbs high, and the heat becomes oppressive. Lunch is eaten hastily, a thin stew of legumes and whatever vegetables are available, thickened with barley flour to stretch it further. You dip your bread into the stew, trying to soften the dry crumbs, and listen to conversations around you. Soldiers discuss rumors of exotic spices from India, tales that seem almost fantastical compared to the humble flavors on their tongues. Someone jokes about the feast that awaits after conquest, a banquet with roasted boar, fine wines, and music. The thought seems almost absurd, yet it fuels their spirits. You think about how food not only nourishes the body, but also sustains hope and dreams. By late afternoon, the march resumes, legs aching from the constant trudging over uneven ground. The thought of the next meal is both a motivator and a worry. How long before the supplies run out? Will the cooks be able to scavenge enough wild herbs or fresh water? As evening falls, you gather again around the campfire, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. Tonight's dinner is a modest stew, thick and grainy, accompanied by slices of dried meat, tough enough to test your jaw's endurance. The soldiers' laughter rings out, mingling with the crackle of flames and the distant calls of night birds. Stories circulate, some humorous, others solemn, creating a tapestry of shared experience that binds the men together. You sip the watered-down wine, its sharp tang a reminder of the long journey ahead. In these moments, the mundane act of eating becomes a ritual of survival and solidarity. You wonder about Alexander's own meals tonight. Does he eat apart in luxury? Or does he share the simple fare with his men? The answer may lie somewhere in between. Some accounts suggest he led by example, enduring the same hardships to inspire loyalty. Others hint at more sumptuous dinners reserved for the high command. Regardless, it's clear that the success of this vast military endeavor hinged not just on strategy and bravery, but on the ability to endure hunger, thirst, and fatigue. As you lie back on your bedroll, belly half full and spirits tempered by exhaustion, you feel a profound connection to the countless soldiers who marched beside Alexander, their lives sustained by nothing more than bread, stew, and unyielding resolve. Tomorrow promises more challenges, more miles, more unknowns, but tonight, under a sky crowded with stars, you find a moment of peace in the simple act of survival, carried forward by the taste of hard-earned food and the flickering glow of campfire light. You're deep into Persia now, and the food is changing with the landscape. Gone are the hard barley rations of the early campaigns. Now your meals come wrapped in strange spices and smells that make your nose twitch and your stomach flutter in anticipation. Tonight, you're perched at the edge of a hastily assembled dining area. Nothing fancy, just a cloth spread over rocks and sand. But the bowls handed out are different. There's lamb, tender for once, spiced with something that smells like cumin and maybe cinnamon, and it's swimming in a thick gravy that sticks to your fingers and your memory. You dip a flatbread into it. It's thinner than the Macedonian. Barley bricks, a little oily, and definitely easier on the jaw. You take a bite and feel your taste buds wake up like they've just been yanked out of bed. It's not home, but it's not bad. One of the older soldiers leans in and tells you that this is what the Persians eat every day. You wonder if that's true, or if this meal is an exception. Spoils of a palace larder, maybe, or a gift from a local satrap trying to stay in Alexander's good graces. Either way, it's better than lentils. Across from you, one of the scribes is recording food inventories, scratching symbols into a wax tablet, while muttering about how much coriander root is left. You ask him what Alexander eats now, and he shrugs. The same, more or less, he says, but his eyes flick toward the central tent. That's where the officers are. That's where the real meals happen, with metal plates and maybe even a chair to sit on. Rumors swirl, as always. Some say Alexander now eats with golden utensils looted from Darius's treasure houses. Others claim he still prefers simple food, a nod to his old ideals. Historians still argue whether Alexander deliberately kept his meals modest to maintain his image as a warrior king, or whether he gradually embraced the luxury that surrounded him like a silk cocoon. You chew your lamb slowly, wondering how much truth there is to any of it. The spices tingle on your tongue, and someone passes around a basket of dried fruits, figs and dates, sticky and sweet, like candy but healthier. A soldier tells you not to eat too many, or you'll end up in the latrine for half the night. You take two anyway. The wine tonight is different too, richer, darker, poured from a ceramic jug with painted horses along the rim. It tastes like it came from a vineyard, not a goat's bladder, which is always a win. You savor a sip, letting it mix with the sweetness of the figs. Someone nearby is roasting nuts over a small fire, pistachios maybe, and the smell is almost festive. For a moment, the war feels distant, like it's paused just long enough for you to enjoy dinner. A breeze carries the scent of the lamb gravy toward the officer's tent, and you wonder if Alexander can smell it too. Maybe he's having the same thing, or maybe he's trying some Persian delicacy you haven't even heard of. There's talk that in one of the captured cities, the kitchen served peacock roasted with saffron and stuffed with almonds. Someone else insists that in Susa, Alexander was offered honey-glazed locusts, considered a delicacy among certain tribes. You shudder at that one and focus on your bread. It's greasy from soaking up lamb fat, but you don't mind. You've come a long way from the barley rations. Still, there's an unease beneath the feast. One of the veterans mentions that the cooks now carry scrolls with Persian recipes, translated by interpreters. They say Alexander wants his men to embrace local customs, to become not just conquerors, but part of the empire. Some grumble about that. They miss the simplicity of home food, even if home meant stale bread and dry cheese. Others are curious. You fall somewhere in between, savoring the new flavors while missing the comfort of familiarity. Tonight's dinner ends with a strange treat, something like a custard, but firmer, almost like a cheesecake sweetened with honey and sprinkled with crushed nuts. You hesitate at first, then take a bite and instantly wish you'd taken more. It melts in your mouth, thick and creamy, and you close your eyes to chase the taste all the way to the back of your brain. This isn't just nourishment. This is reward, recognition, or maybe even a bribe to keep morale from cracking under the weight of endless marches. The stars come out slowly overhead, and someone strikes up a tune on a lyre, a soft, plucking melody that mingles with the clink of metal bowls being stacked. You lie back on your cloak, stomach full, tongue tingling, and you wonder again what Alexander is doing right now. Maybe he's eating alone, plotting his next move. Maybe he's raising a toast with generals, savoring the same meal you just had, but with more pomp and a better seat. You hear a whisper from 2 tents over, someone claiming Alexander eats while standing as a sign of constant readiness. Another voice insists he always drinks last. To show discipline, you roll your eyes, but part of you wants to believe it. The mythology of the man grows with every bite, every rumor. Someone throws a chicken bone at a dog skulking near the fire, and the mutt darts off with it, tail wagging. You smile, not because it's funny, but because it's so human, so mundane. In the midst of all this grandeur, the meal may have changed, but you're still a soldier, still a cog in this massive moving conquest. As you wipe your hands on your cloak and feel the meat settle into your bones, you realize that food has become the story between battles, the bridge between bloodshed and sleep. And tonight, for once, the story tastes pretty good. You close your eyes and let the warmth of the fire and the fullness in your belly lull you towards sleep. The lyre plays on, soft and steady, and you dream of peacocks and saffron and a quiet feast far from the clamour of war. You wake up to the smell of something both familiar and strange. Smoke, but not from a fire meant for warmth or warfare. This is kitchen smoke, laced with a scent of roasting fowl and baking grain, a promise of breakfast that's more than just dried rations or yesterday's leftovers. You sit up and stretch, joints popping, eyes blinking away the dust of another Persian dawn, and you realize the camp has shifted slightly. You're not near a battlefield anymore. You're in one of the towns that surrendered quickly, and the local people, hoping to curry favor, have opened their storehouses and kitchens to the Macedonian army. There's even talk of a feast later, something to honor Alexander's arrival. But for now, you're watching the cook, still the same tooth-deprived veteran, pull something from a clay oven. It's a flatbread again, but this one smells of yeast and has a sheen of oil across the top. You're handed a chunk, warm and soft, and you barely wait before biting in. The inside is fluffy, torn by hand, and it almost reminds you of something you might have had back in Macedonia if your mother had ever been rich enough to afford olive oil. A few moments later, someone plops a bowl into your lap. Millet porridge, you think, but cooked with milk, sweetened with date syrup, and topped with crushed pistachios. It's breakfast, Persian style, and your stomach, still half asleep, rumbles. With appreciation, you take a spoonful, and it's like eating warmth, soft, sweet, not too heavy. For once, you don't feel like you're preparing for another 20-mile march. You feel like a guest. The man sitting next to you jokes that if you stick around long enough, you'll end up writing a cookbook. You laugh, mouthful of porridge, and tell him you'll call it Warrior's Bites. He suggests lentils and lamb, the march to India. Both are terrible names, but the point is, this moment is rare, quiet, satisfying. A young Persian boy, maybe 10, comes by with a tray of dried apricots and offers you one with shy eyes and a practiced bow. You thank him, surprised by your own gentleness, and bite into the apricot. It's tart and chewy and reminds you of late summers. Alexander is due to give a speech today, and already soldiers are brushing off their cloaks and trying to remember how to stand at attention without falling over. But for now, everyone's eating. Even the officers have relaxed, their normally stern faces softened by bowls of warm food and cups of herbal tea, which tastes of anise and mint. You spot a scribe near the officers' camp sketching what looks like a meal arrangement. Someone says Alexander wants to include these new flavors in the army's permanent supply chain, replacing the dull, lentil bread cycle with something that doesn't sap the will to live. Another soldier pipes up that there's even been a suggestion of hiring Persian chefs. That gets a mix of cheers and groans. Cheers from the young recruits who haven't yet built an identity around grumbling. Groans from the veterans who trust nothing that doesn't come in a crust of dust. You finish your breakfast and stretch. Again, watching the camp slowly come alive. Horses are being brushed, spears are being inspected. But even now, the food lingers in your senses. Honey, milk, spice, warmth. You wonder how long it'll last. As it turns out, not long. Midday arrives, and with it, a sharp change. Alexander has ordered movement, and suddenly all that softness vanishes under the weight of discipline. You're on the road again by noon, trudging through sun-baked fields and rocky passes. The air is hot, dry, and full of biting dust, and the porridge in your belly feels like a distant dream. But by dusk, the column slows, and a new camp is established outside a village that surrendered. Without a fight, word spreads that the local noble has prepared a feast in Alexander's honor, and not just any feast, a royal one. You're not invited to the inner tent, of course, but the spillover is generous. Fires are lit, kettles set to boil, and soon the smells become unbearable in the best way. You find yourself near one of the bigger pots, watching, as a mixture of rice, raisins, chickpeas, and chunks of lamb steams under a lid of woven reeds. You recognize the smell of cinnamon again, and something else. Saffron, maybe, expensive and floral, an aroma that feels entirely foreign and oddly luxurious. Someone stirs the pot and reveals the rice at the bottom has crisped to a golden crust. You whistle. That's the good part. The nobles call it tadig. You call it magic. When bowls are handed out, you're among the lucky. The rice is sticky, spicy, and rich. The lamb falls apart with a spoon. You tear bread to scoop the grains and chase it with more of that dark, rich wine. It tastes better after a day of walking. Everything does. Around you, conversation picks up. People begin telling stories again. One man swears he saw Alexander taste the rice and smile. Another insists the king refused to eat until the elders of the village had been served first. A third claims Alexander asked the Persian cooks for their recipe, planning to share it with his mother back in Macedon. Whether any of this is true doesn't matter. The food is real. The moment is real. You finish your bowl and almost cry when you realize you've left none for a second round. A nearby pot is ladling out something sweet, stewed apples with honey, and rose water. You manage to snag a cup and sip it slowly, the floral scent rising through your nose, tickling your memory. You've never eaten like this before. Not during the march, not during training, not even at home. And for a moment, you understand why people say that food is power. Alexander isn't just conquering cities, he's conquering stomachs too. Yours included. Later that night, you lie beneath the stars with a belly full of flavors you can't even name. You listen to soldiers snoring and laughing in equal measure, their bodies resting even if their minds race ahead. You think about the next meal, the next village, the next unknown delicacy that waits just beyond the next bend in the road. You wonder if Alexander dreams of food the way you do now, not because he's hungry, but because each dish is another way to bind the world together. Bread, after all, is universal. So is wine. So is sleep. And tonight, fed like a prince but resting in the dirt, you feel a little more like a part of something truly legendary. You wake with the sharp scent of onions and cumin already drifting through the early morning air, and for once you're not irritated by it. It's oddly comforting, this fragrant greeting, promising a day that might not begin with hard bread and silent chewing. You sit up, brush dust off your cloak, and notice that someone's built a larger cooking area than usual, complete with earthen stoves and bronze pots big enough to bathe a child in. There's a strange energy in the air, not celebratory exactly, but purposeful. The army isn't moving today. You've stopped near a Persian city that surrendered willingly and offered food, shelter, and tribute. Alexander, always one to mix diplomacy with performance, has turned the delay into a public opportunity. And so, here you are, one of thousands being fed from an impromptu outdoor kitchen, where the fusion of Macedonian appetite and Persian culinary skill is beginning to take form. Today's breakfast is flatbread again, but thinner and rolled, almost like parchment. Inside it is a spiced mash of lentils, onions, and chopped figs. You bite in cautiously, and the textures surprise you. Sweet, savory, soft, with a small crunch from the fig seeds. It tastes like someone actually thought about how this meal might taste. Someone near you murmurs that this dish is common in the region, eaten by soldiers and scholars alike, and suddenly it feels less foreign and more like a new kind of normal. Tea follows, hot, herbal, laced with wild mint and something bitter, probably dried orange peel. You sip carefully and watch as the Persian cooks continue to stir pots and flip breads, their movements practiced, efficient, and oddly elegant. It's mesmerizing. A Macedonian officer joins you, chewing the same fig lentil roll, and mutters that if this campaign doesn't lead to riches, at least it's improving everyone's palate. You chuckle, but he's not wrong. Alexander's conquest is changing the army in ways no one expected. The midday meal is even more elaborate. It's not a feast, no parading of nobles or toasts to gods, but it's better than anything you've had since leaving Egypt. Chickpeas are mashed with garlic and olive oil and spread onto barley crackers. Lamb is roasted on open spits, seasoned with a red spice you don't recognize, and served with grilled onions and dates. Someone hands you a bowl of yogurt mixed with shredded cucumber, and it's so cooling, so sharp and fresh that you immediately forget the midday heat for a few precious minutes. The soldiers are quieter than usual during the meal, and it takes you a while to realize why. Everyone's focused on their food, not scarfing it down, not grimacing through it, actually enjoying it, savoring it. The cooks are smiling too, half amused by the awe written across the rough faces of men who thought bread and wine was the apex of military cuisine. One Persian cook, an older woman with calloused hands and a commanding stare, seems particularly proud. She moves through the crowd like a general, inspecting bowls, giving orders, slapping backs, and scolding anyone who wastes so much as a spoonful. She shouts something in her language, and a translator nearby laughs. She says we fight like wolves but eat like kittens. It's the best compliment you've had all month. After the meal, you gather around a fire pit with a few comrades and talk about nothing. Home, sandals, women, food again. Always food. One man describes a fish stew from the Aegean, full of lemon and garlic. Another swears by a Thracian cheese that could knock a man flat if it wasn't aged properly. And you find yourself describing today's cucumber yogurt bowl in detail, which makes everyone groan and say you've gone soft. But later, when someone offers seconds, those same men are first in line. Evening falls, and with it comes a new aroma, roasted grains, maybe wheat or spelt, simmering with crushed nuts and honey. You follow your nose and find the same woman cook, pouring the mixture into clay cups, topping each with dried rose petals. It's a dessert, simple but rich, sticky and fragrant. She offers you one, and you hesitate for only a second before accepting. The grains are soft, the nuts buttery, the honey sharp but not overpowering. You close your eyes and let it melt on your tongue. For a moment, it's not about Alexander or Persia or conquest or maps inked with ambition. It's just food, just joy, Just the strange miracle that this, of all things, could happen in the middle of a war. You spot a boy nearby scribbling with a stick in the dirt. Curious, you ask what he's drawing. He says he's copying the design of one of the dessert bowls so he can carve it into wood later. You ask why. He shrugs. So I remember today. You nod. That makes sense. Because tomorrow the army moves again. There's always another city, another river, another skirmish. But this meal, this strange, beautiful hybrid of Macedonian hunger and Persian generosity, this you'll remember. As night sets in, the officers retreat to their tents, and the fires burn low. Someone sings softly, an old Macedonian lullaby about rain and vineyards. You lie back, full and strangely calm, the taste of rose petals still lingering, and you wonder, not for the first time, if maybe the greatest conquest here isn't land or gold or glory. Maybe it's this, the merging of flavors, the breaking of bread, the idea that men who came with swords can end the day with sweet grains and shared laughter. Somewhere out there, Alexander the Great is probably dining on something even finer, spiced, game perhaps, or roasted pheasant, but it doesn't matter. For once you don't envy him. For once, you feel like a king in your own right. The dirt is still hard, the stars are still cold, but your belly is warm, and that's enough. You close your eyes and dream not of battles or borders, but of the next meal, the next new taste, the next quiet, unexpected moment when history pauses, just long enough for dessert. The following day begins with the rhythmic clang of pots and the surprisingly delicate aroma of cardamom drifting on the breeze. You rub your eyes, stretch out your legs from under a scratchy woolen blanket, and try to process what you're smelling. It's not stew, and it's not burnt barley. This is something sweeter, something gentler. Someone whispers that the Persian cook stayed overnight, invited by Alexander himself to prepare breakfast for the officers, and by extension, the rest of you. You sit up quickly, your stomach already curious. Word spreads fast. Today's meal is a breakfast porridge, made from cracked wheat simmered in goat's milk and flavored with honey, and those mysterious Eastern spices no one can properly name, but everyone suddenly loves. The bowl you're handed is hot to the touch, and you nearly burn your fingers, but you're too hungry to care. The texture is soft, like rice pudding but grainier, and the flavors are both familiar and strange, creamy, sweet, and faintly floral. You eat slowly, for once, not because you're rationing, but because you want it to last. A nearby soldier dips his finger into his bowl and tries to guess the ingredients like a seasoned chef. Honey, sure. Milk, obviously. But what's the other thing? Tastes like perfume. Someone suggests it's saffron, others argue for rosewater, but the truth is, none of you really know. It's exotic and delicious, and therefore deeply suspicious. Still, every bowl is scraped clean, and a few daring men go back to ask for seconds. The cooks oblige, amused, and the army becomes just a little more civilized for a few hours. Today is a rest day again, not for leisure, but because the horses need shoeing and the engineers are surveying terrain ahead. That means more time for food. Around mid-morning, you see men milling around the cook tents again, not because they're hungry, but because they're curious. Something is sizzling in oil, and the scent is sharp and mouth-watering. You join the crowd and find small fritters being spooned into pans, golden and crisping quickly. They're made from chickpeas, onions, and herbs, flattened into discs and fried until the edges curl and brown. When one is handed to you, it's still steaming. You bite in and nearly burn your tongue, but the flavor is worth it. Crunchy on the outside, soft and savory on the inside, with hints of garlic and something tangy that makes you crave more. These are nothing like Macedonian food. They're refined, complex, made with intent and style, not just necessity. You sit on a rock and eat slowly, watching the cooks work like sculptors. One Persian man, young, with a scar down his cheek, and a quiet confidence, catches your eye and nods toward a pot of bright red sauce simmering nearby. Dip, he says in accented Greek. You do, and the fritter transforms. The sauce is spicy, but not overwhelming, made from crushed pomegranates and chili. You've never tasted anything like it. Around you, soldiers moan with pleasure. Some, clapping the cooks on the back like long-lost comrades. Others are already trying to replicate what they saw, mashing lentils with makeshift tools and burning their hands in hot oil. Not everyone succeeds, but the mood is light, almost festive. One man jokes that Alexander should forget conquering cities and conquer recipes instead. Another says if Persia feeds them like this, maybe they should stop fighting and start farming. You laugh, but the idea lingers. At midday, something changes. You're summoned, no, invited, to a public demonstration of Persian table customs. A gesture from Alexander, it turns out, to show appreciation for the hospitality and sophistication of the people he's trying to fold into his empire. A long carpet is laid on the ground, and food is arranged in careful, concentric circles. Rice with saffron and nuts, roasted quail stuffed with dried fruits, flatbreads sprinkled with sesame, eggplant stews with yogurt, and a sweet almond pastry so delicate it flakes at a breath. You're not allowed to eat yet. First, you must observe. A local nobleman explains each dish. His Greek formal and halting. He speaks of balance, hot and cold, moist and dry, sweet and sour, and how each meal is meant to satisfy, not just hunger, but the soul. You glance around and see Macedonian soldiers nodding slowly, some pretending to understand, others genuinely fascinated. When the meal begins, it's quiet, no shouting, no grabbing, just hands reaching slowly, mouths chewing thoughtfully, eyes closing in silent approval. You eat like you've never eaten before, carefully, reverently. The rice is soft and fragrant, the quail tender and juicy. The almond pastry melts on your tongue, leaving behind a memory more than a taste. This isn't food for marching. This is food for memory, for storytelling, for poetry. And suddenly, it hits you. This is what Alexander wants. Not just conquest, not just territory, but fusion, union, a world where flavors cross borders, where barley stew sits beside saffron rice, where fried chickpeas speak louder than swords. The idea terrifies some, excites others, and confuses the rest. You just want the recipe for the almond pastry. As night falls, fires are lit again, and the final meal of the day is simpler. Spiced lentil soup with flatbread and small wedges of goat cheese. But now even this feels elevated. You eat more slowly, more mindfully. The soup is thick, seasoned with cumin and coriander, and the bread is warm, softer than usual. The cheese crumbles easily and adds a creamy saltiness that balances the meal perfectly. You chew, sip, chew again. Everything feels deliberate. You think about the men who will return home and try to describe this taste, this day, this quiet revolution of the stomach. Most will fail. Language doesn't always stretch far enough, but maybe that's the point. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained, only tasted, only remembered. You lie back once more, arms behind your head, belly full but not stuffed. You stare at the stars and wonder what your mother would say if she tasted today's food. Would she understand? Would she call it strange or beautiful? Would she say you've changed? The wind picks up, carrying with it the faint aroma of spices still clinging to the air. You smile. Change is the point, isn't it? Tomorrow you'll march again, and maybe the food will go back to stew and hard bread. But tonight, for this one moment, you've eaten history, and it tastes like possibility. You wake to the scent of something peculiar and entirely out of place. Cinnamon. Not the dry spice that clings to the back of your throat, but the warm, toasty kind that makes your stomach turn with both confusion and curiosity. You sit up, brush dust from your face, and shuffle toward the central fire pit where breakfast is being prepped. There's murmuring among the soldiers, something about a new cook, someone sent directly from Babylon, which everyone agrees means he either offended someone important or is too good to be left unsupervised. The pot over the fire is deeper than usual, and from it emerges a sticky, fragrant porridge, unlike anything you've seen since leaving Macedon. This one's been cooked down with dates and topped with slivers of almonds and a spoonful of what someone claims is clarified butter. One taste and your mouth doesn't know what to do. Sweetness isn't something you're used to this early. It's always been salt, starch, chew. But this breakfast is a slow melt, a gentle easing into the day. You eat it without talking. Others do the same. For once, the morning is silent, not because of tension or fatigue, but because of reverence. You sit a little longer after eating, the bowl warm in your hands, watching the sunlight creep across the canvas of the command tent. Alexander hasn't emerged yet. Rumor is he's meeting with Persian scribes and scholars to discuss culinary, diplomacy. Not that anyone knows exactly what that means, but you assume it involves more meals like this one, and frankly, you're not opposed. Mid-morning brings a surprise inspection. You and your unit are told to dress in your cleanest tunics and gather in formation. You groan, wipe off your boots with a piece of straw, and line up beside a soldier who's still chewing the last of his breakfast. When Alexander finally appears, it's not with his usual grim purpose, but with something like a smirk. He walks slowly between the rows, eyeing each of you like a sculptor judging stone. Then he speaks, not of war, not of maps, but of bread. Yes, bread. What is civilization? He asks. If not the difference between bread you eat and bread you break together? Some nod solemnly, others look puzzled, but you get it. You've felt it. Breaking bread means sharing. Sharing means understanding. And understanding, well, that's what empires are supposed to be built on, isn't it? At midday, as the sun hits its highest, a new meal is brought out. Not stew, not bread and olives, but something called ashi reshte, a Persian noodle soup. You laugh at the idea. Noodles? Out here? But the pot smells heavenly. Herbs, beans, garlic, and something sharp and vinegary. You get a bowl and slurp cautiously. It's thick, almost like a stew, but with soft ribbons of dough curling through it, and a tangy cream swirled on top that cuts through the heaviness. Someone says it's made with fermented whey. You don't care what it is. It's good, satisfying, complex. And again, you find yourself thinking, this is what peace could taste like. You sit next to a soldier from Phrygia and another from Bactria, neither of whom you know well, and you all eat together without speaking. For once, silence doesn't feel like distance. It feels like unity. Dinner is even more elaborate. Word spreads that tonight's feast is meant to impress some local governors who are still on the fence about pledging allegiance. That means two things: better food and tighter tunics. Everyone washes, some even trim their beards, and by nightfall the camp looks like it's preparing for a royal audience. Long mats are laid down, cushions brought out, torches lit. Platters arrive one after another: stuffed grape leaves, lamb roasted with apricots, rice laced with orange peel and pistachios, fried cheese pastries with a honey glaze. You pile your plate high, not because you're greedy, but because you're afraid this might be the last time for a while you get to taste anything more refined than boiled roots. The grape leaves are tender, with a zing of lemon and a filling that tastes both earthy and herbal. The lamb melts in your mouth. The rice, fluffy and fragrant, clings together just enough to scoop by hand without making a mess. You feel like a king, even as flies buzz nearby, and your neighbor drops a fig into your lap. One of the Persian cooks walks past, and you catch his eye. "What's this spice?" you ask, pointing to your rice. He smiles. "Zereshk," he says. You blink. "Come again." "Barberries," he clarifies. "Sour berries, for balance." You chew slowly, feeling the burst of tartness on your tongue. It works. It all works. You find yourself thinking in tastes, not words. History becomes flavor. Politics becomes texture. Conquest becomes contrast. Late in the meal, a toast is proposed. Not by Alexander, he's still deep in discussion with a scholar, but by a young officer who stands, slightly drunk, and raises his cup. "To the food of friends," he says, "and the enemies who cooked it better than we ever did." Laughter ripples across the mats. You raise your cup too. It's watered wine, of course. No one wants a repeat of the spear-throwing incident from last month. But it feels rich, ceremonial. You sip and sigh. This is the kind of night that etches itself into memory, not for the politics, not for the history books, but for the warmth of the soup, the sweetness of the lamb, the glow of the firelight on copper plates. As the meal winds down, dessert is served. Small cubes of something gelatinous, dusted with powdered sugar. You bite one and discover rose-flavored jelly, sticky and fragrant. Turkish delight, someone whispers. Not that it's Turkish. No one knows who invented it, but it's delightful all the same. You lie back, full beyond comfort, and watch the stars emerge again, brighter than ever. You wonder if Alexander feels this full, this satisfied. You wonder if he dreams in spices now, if he ever thinks about the first stew back in Thrace and laughs. You close your eyes, stomach groaning, heart strangely full. Today wasn't just a day of food, it was a day of revelation. And you know deep down that the empire Alexander dreams of can't be built on swords alone. It needs flavors, shared meals, respect, earned not through fear, but through food, as sleep overtakes you. The last thing you think is, I hope tomorrow's breakfast has cinnamon again. You wake the next morning with a belly still full from the feast, your mouth dry from the wine, and a strange sense of hope clinging to your skin like dew. The camp is unusually quiet, not the stillness of dread, but the hush of people nursing. Satisfaction, a kind of communal food hangover that slows everything down. Your bones creak as you sit up, and your stomach reminds you that indulgence, while divine in the moment, comes at a cost. Still, you do it all over again, and you probably will. Word has spread that today Alexander plans to meet with local chefs and merchants to discuss provisioning the next leg of the journey east. That means new ingredients, new dishes, and more opportunities to taste the empire as it's being carved. You shuffle toward the fire pit, hoping for something light. Instead, you're handed a warm flatbread stuffed with mashed chickpeas, garlic, and a drizzle of sesame oil. It's different, nutty, hearty, not too heavy. You take a bite and find your mouth filling with a creamy, earthy richness you didn't expect. It's called hummus, someone says, and it comes from further west, from Phoenician traders who learned it from Egyptian cooks. You don't care who invented it. It's good. It's new. It makes you feel like you're tasting the world one bite at a time. You eat slowly, savoring each mouthful, and sit with a few others who are doing the same. There's no rush today. Not yet. The army is paused, waiting for scouts to return with word of terrain and water sources. That gives the cooks time to experiment, which means the camp smells like a dozen different kitchens all bubbling at once. Mid-morning brings an impromptu lesson from one of Alexander's new culinary advisors, a man from Susa who claims he once cooked for Darius himself. He stands before a small crowd, holding up a peculiar fruit, pomegranate. Most of the soldiers have seen it, but few have eaten it in this way. The cook splits it open, revealing the blood-red jewels inside, and begins to explain its uses. It's not just for eating, he says. It's medicine, ritual, and symbol. The seeds are mixed into sauces, the juice turned into molasses for meat. Dishes, the rind burned to smoke out bad air. You're handed a small piece and try it. The tartness explodes on your tongue, bright and electric, and you wonder why anyone would ever eat anything else. Lunch is a pomegranate-based stew with lamb and rice, served over flatbread. The meat is tender, the rice perfectly steamed, and the sauce, a mixture of pomegranate juice, walnuts, and herbs, is tangy, rich, and deeply satisfying. You eat with your hands, tearing the bread and scooping the stew in practiced motions, licking your fingers between bites. You're no longer just feeding your body. You're learning, absorbing, becoming something else. Part warrior, part diner, part citizen of a world that's starting to blend and blur. After the meal, a lull. Soldiers doze in the shade, mend their gear, write letters home. You find yourself sketching the dishes you've tried in the dirt, listing ingredients like a map: chickpeas, garlic, sesame, lamb, pomegranate, rice, mint. You don't know what compels you to record it. Maybe it's the feeling that these meals mean more than they seem, that they're not just food, but memory, identity, markers of place and time. You wander over to the market stalls set up at the edge of camp. Locals have come to trade, mostly cloth, pottery, and spices. You smell cinnamon, cumin, dried rose petals, and something musky and dark that a trader tells you is asafoetida. Smells bad, he says, but cook it right, and it tastes like heaven. You buy a small pouch, mostly out of curiosity, and tuck it into your belt. Tonight's dinner is simpler, humbler, a return to the basics. Lentil soup with cumin and garlic, served with pickled vegetables and a bit of goat cheese. You miss the extravagance of last night, but this meal is no less important. It reminds you of the early days, of survival, and the pickled vegetables, bright, sour, and crunchy, cut through the monotony of the lentils in a way that makes you smile. There's still creativity here, still care, even in simplicity. As the sun sets, a small group of musicians gathers near the main fire. They play instruments you don't recognize, lutes with long necks, pipes made of bone, a drum shaped like an hourglass. The music is slow and mournful, then fast and joyful, shifting like the wind. Food and music, two things that transcend. Language. You sit near them and share a bowl of dried figs and honey-roasted nuts with a soldier from the north, whose name you barely know. You don't talk much. You just chew and listen. The figs are chewy and sweet, the nuts warm and fragrant. The music lingers in your bones. Alexander walks past once, nodding slightly at the musicians, then vanishes into his tent. Rumor is, he's fasting tonight, in honor of some local god he promised to respect. You wonder if he misses dinner, if he sneaks a fig or two when no one's looking. Probably not. He's disciplined in ways you can't quite grasp. Still, it's strange to think of him going without, especially when the rest of you are still so wrapped in the spell of food. Later, as the stars return, someone begins telling a story about the time a cook accidentally fed Alexander a stew, laced with nightshade. He didn't die, obviously, but he did hallucinate for a full day and tried to challenge a goat to single combat. No one knows if it's true, but it makes for a great tale. Laughter ripples through the camp. You lie back again, watching the sparks rise from the fire, thinking of all the things you've eaten, the things you've learned. This campaign is no longer just about territory or glory. It's about texture, smell, the memory of mint in yogurt, the sting of sumac, the slow heat of cumin. It's about meals that make you forget you're at war. And as you drift off to sleep, belly full, fingers sticky from figs, you dream not of battles, but of spice markets and shared platters, of a future where food is what binds people, not swords, where conquerors are remembered not just for what they took, but for what they tasted. You awaken to the sound of wooden wheels creaking through dust, traders arriving with baskets of mysterious roots, and leafy bundles that smell like both medicine and magic, and you realize that breakfast today might be unlike any you've had before. The air is dense with the perfume of spices, the aroma of wood smoke, and the sharp tang of early morning sweat from soldiers rubbing their eyes and stretching their backs, already anticipating another day of marching. But you're not moving yet. Alexander has ordered a temporary halt, a logistical pause to regroup and resupply, which means more time to explore what it actually means to eat on the move, across a patchwork of lands stitched together by conquest and curiosity. You're handed a bowl of porridge, but it's different this time. No longer just barley boiled in water. It's been steeped in goat's milk, sweetened with dates mashed into a syrup, and topped with slivered pistachios and dried apricots. You don't ask how this miracle happened. You just dig in. Each spoonful is warm, creamy, and deeply comforting. And for a moment you forget you're a soldier. You're a guest at some rustic inn from a dream, a traveller being restored. The cook, an older man with a crooked back and cheerful scowl, tells you this recipe came from a caravan that once passed through Bactria, where shepherds live on mountain slopes and consider breakfast a sacred meal. You nod and eat another bite, realizing that for all the talk of empires, it's these small exchanges, these edible memories, that make history human. Later that morning, you help unload supplies from a convoy of donkeys, sacks of lentils, jugs of olive oil, crates of garlic, heaps of dried herbs, and 2 large amphorae filled with something labelled only as vine fruit mash. You sneak, a sniff and recoil. It's pungent, fermented beyond recognition. The quartermaster laughs and tells you it's for sauce, not drinking, unless you want to lose your eyesight. By midday, the cooks are hard at work, and today you're invited to assist. You stand near a wide stone hearth where pots bubble and sizzle, knives flash in the sunlight, and a mortar and pestle is used like a weapon against cloves, coriander, and fennel seeds. You're assigned to prep garlic, and after slicing 20, heads your hands reek, your fingers burn, and yet you feel useful in a new way. You're not just consuming this world, you're helping make it. Lunch is another experiment. Roasted eggplant mashed with tahini, lemon juice, and a smoky spice. You can't name, served with crisped flatbread and a salad of shredded greens tossed with vinegar and wild herbs. It's light, tangy, and perfectly balanced, the kind of meal that makes you sit straighter, chew slower, and let your tongue decipher every layer of flavor. A Persian scout sitting beside you calls the eggplant dish baba ganoush and tells you his mother used to serve it with pickled turnips and lamb fat on holidays. You both smile at that. Food is memory, and now this moment is part of yours. After lunch, there's a lecture, not the kind with scrolls and scholars, but an informal lesson given by one of Alexander's scribes, who's been studying how food functions in diplomacy. He tells a small circle of soldiers that the king believes food is more than sustenance. It's an offering, a signal, a way to bridge language and loyalty. The bread you break with someone might save your life later. The wine you pour could be the difference between alliance and rebellion. You never thought of dinner as a negotiation before, but now it clicks. the feasts, the special dishes, even the gestures of sharing. These are not accidents. They are strategy, as precise as a phalanx. That night, there's no grand feast, no big announcement, just dinner under a sky that seems impossibly wide. You're handed a plate of spiced lentils with rice, stewed chicken in a sauce made from yogurt, cucumbers and mint, and a slice of flatbread so thin it's almost translucent. The chicken is tender, the yogurt cool and refreshing, the lentils earthy and grounding. There's no meat to chew through like a test of will, no dried crusts to gnaw on in frustration. This meal flows. It nourishes without challenging. You eat slowly, savoring every part of it, grateful for the cooks who turned a supply tent into a sanctuary. After the meal, you help clean. You wipe bowls, stoke the fire, gather discarded bones and scraps to bury, so wild dogs don't come sniffing. It's quiet work, but meaningful. Around you, men and women talk in low tones about their homes, their parents, the foods they miss. Sweet saffron rice from Sogdiana, pickled fish from the Aegean coast, honeyed pastries from Babylon. Someone mentions olives, and half the group sighs like they've just remembered a lost lover. You get it. You miss things too. You dream of them sometimes. As the fire burns low, someone produces a pot of something they call night milk. It's warm goat's milk, gently simmered with cinnamon, cardamom, and a bit of honey, meant to help with sleep. You cup your hands around the small bowl, take a sip, and feel your entire body exhale. It's not just soothing, it's a lullaby. You drink, you lie back, the stars 1,000 pinpricks above, and let the day settle in your bones. Today wasn't dramatic. There were no battles, no proclamations, no sudden changes in the course of history, but it was full of flavor, full of memory, full of small, soft things that make the world livable. You drift off thinking of yogurt and mint, of garlic on your fingers, of the warmth of night milk sliding down your throat. The world may shift again tomorrow, may ask you to kill or flee or march till your feet bleed. But tonight, you are just a person who ate well, who learned something, who shared something. That too is part of empire. That too is how history is made, not just in wars or treaties, but in the quiet, slow rituals of nourishment. The next morning begins not with the usual clang of armor or the bark of orders, but with the gentle hum of bees drifting over flowering shrubs outside the village where Alexander's army has temporarily settled. You blink awake on a soft bed of straw, the scent of last night's fire still lingering in your tunic, and hear something unusual. Laughter. True, carefree laughter, rising from the direction of the camp's makeshift kitchen, where something sweet is being stirred in a wide copper pot. The scent finds you before your legs do. Honey, spices, and something else. Something deeply nostalgic. You follow it like a thread through the crowd, weaving between soldiers sharpening blades, grooms brushing down sweaty horses, and local children chasing each other through hanging laundry. At the heart of this morning's magic stands a merchant. From the east, a man with a pointed beard, orange-stained fingers, and a grin like a fox who's just remembered where he buried his prize. He's stirring what he calls Samsa syrup, made from boiled dates, pomegranate juice, a splash of fermented barley water, and crushed almonds. It's meant to be spooned over semolina cakes, which he's shaping by hand, small, golden discs dotted with anise seeds and dried figs. He offers you one, still hot, the syrup sinking into the soft crumb as you bite. It's warm, sticky, and blissfully sweet, the kind of food that reminds you why people build cities, grow orchards, and fight wars. Around you, the soldiers murmur. With pleasure, some clutching extra cakes for later, others trading bits of cloth or coins for the recipe, which the merchant writes on palm leaves using a sharpened twig dipped in ink made from soot and goat's milk. Later, as you help pack the food supplies onto carts for the next leg of the journey, you discover a new appreciation for these logistical miracles. The quartermaster shows you his ledger, a complicated mosaic of quantities and routes of what will spoil in 2 days, what can last a week, and what should only be eaten if you're desperate. He lets you carry a tightly sealed jar of pickled onions, and you guard it like a relic, already dreaming of their sharp, sour crunch. The march begins by midday, under a sky that hangs heavy with heat. Food is now function. Dried flatbreads rolled tightly and tucked into belts, strips of salted fish wrapped in fig leaves, small bundles of raisins and nuts held in cloth pouches. You chew as you walk, conserving water, avoiding talking. But food still finds ways to become communal. A soldier beside you shares a sliver of candied lemon peel, and another offers a bite of something he calls Trojan bark, a sticky confection of sesame seeds and honey pressed into brittle squares. It's dry, cloying, and incredibly energizing, a reminder that even in motion, the army carries sweetness with it. That evening, the camp halts beside a slow-moving river where fish glint like silver blades under the surface. A group of soldiers strips off their gear and dives in, returning with slippery prizes that flap and gleam in their hands. Soon, the fires are lit, and a hasty supper takes shape. You help clean the fish, small river trout with firm pink flesh, then watch as a Bactrian cook wraps them in leaves with herbs, ties the bundles with twine, and buries them in hot coals. While the fish roast, you crush coriander seeds and peppercorns between flat stones, then mix the powder into a sauce of garlic, oil, and fermented grape paste. When the fish emerge, steaming and fragrant, you help lay them on flatbread and drizzle the sauce across the fillets. It's one of the best meals of your life, not because it's fancy, but because you helped make it, you earned it, and it tastes like discovery. After dinner, the cook offers a final treat, thin slices of melon from a nearby orchard, their flesh so juicy that it runs down your chin as you bite. Melon, you think, in the middle of nowhere. It feels like a miracle. Someone starts telling stories again, this time about Alexander's rumored meals in Egypt, how he once shared lotus flower stew with a high priest, or how he refused a gold-plated plate because it made the olives taste like metal. These tales may be exaggerated, but no one cares. Around the fire, food becomes legend. A scribe recounts how Persian kings used to serve ice-cold desserts in midsummer, hauled from mountain caves in sealed jars lined with straw and snow. You listen, enraptured, wondering how anyone could eat snow in the desert. But that's the magic of empire. It stretches the limits of what seems possible. Before sleep, there's tea. Not the leafy steep of modern times, but a rough infusion of cinnamon bark, bay leaves, and dried orange peel boiled in a blackened pot. It's bitter and hot, and somehow exactly what your tired body craves. You hold the cup, warming your hands, and look around at your fellow soldiers, now quiet, their faces soft in the firelight. They've eaten, they've rested. Tomorrow they'll fight, march, or build, whatever the king commands. But tonight, they are simply men with full bellies and quiet thoughts. You fall asleep dreaming of semolina cakes and sweet river trout, and in the distance, you think you hear Alexander's voice, not issuing orders, but laughing, chewing, maybe savoring a bite of that same fig-studded cake. He is many things: strategist, warrior, visionary, but he is also a man who eats, who tastes, who knows the power of a meal shared beneath the stars. And so do you. As dawn breaks, the camp stirs slowly beneath a sky painted in pale gold and soft lavender. The air is cooler than the previous days, a gentle breeze weaving through the tents and scattering dry leaves along the dusty ground. You wake feeling the weight of the journey already pressing on your limbs, but also a flicker of anticipation, because today you move into unfamiliar terrain, lands whispered about in taverns and markets, where spices and silks come from distant corners of the world, and the very earth seems to hum with promise. The morning ritual begins quietly, pots clatter, and fires are rekindled from embers saved under ash. You watch as the cooks prepare a simple breakfast, a porridge made from ground barley, boiled in water thickened with a splash of goat's milk. It's bland but warming, a stew, of humble origins meant to steady the stomach before hours of marching. Some men dip stale bread into the porridge, others eat it with a handful of dried figs or a smear of honey if they're lucky. The honey is precious, kept in small leather pouches sealed tight against the heat, a reminder that sweetness is rare on this campaign. You savor a spoonful, the sticky nectar coating your tongue and lifting your spirits. As the camp prepares to break, you note the variety of supplies packed onto wagons and saddled horses, sacks of flour, salted meats pressed into blocks, clusters of garlic and onions, and crates filled with small ceramic jars holding mustard seeds, coriander, and peppercorns. You wonder about the cooks who will use these ingredients to create meals that remind the soldiers of home, or at least something close to it. Today's march leads the army through rolling hills dotted with wild thyme and rosemary, their scents thick in the sun-warmed air. The terrain is kinder here, less rocky than before, and the soldiers' spirits lift as they sing songs past, down from Macedonia. The verses tell of heroism and love, of gods who walked among men, and you hum along, feeling the rhythm of the march synchronize with the beat of the music. Midday brings a break beside a clear spring, its waters cool and sparkling, a welcome relief after days of dusty travel. Here, food takes on a ritual importance. Bundles of bread are broken open, clusters of grapes passed around, and small pieces of smoked fish shared among friends. You taste the salt and smoke, gritty and sharp, and marvel at how these simple flavors become a feast when hunger sharpens the senses. Soldiers gather around, swapping stories and debating the merits of different foraging spots. One swears by a patch of wild asparagus near a rocky outcrop. Another raves about the bitter sweetness of local wild cherries. You join in, tasting bits of fruit offered from rough hands, each bite a fleeting connection to a land that is both foreign and strangely familiar. As the sun climbs high, the army resumes its march. Your legs grow weary, your throat parched, but the promise of tonight's meal keeps you moving. You imagine the cook's fire crackling again, the smell of roasting meat drifting on the breeze, the warmth of a shared meal under a canopy of stars. Evening descends with a sudden chill, and the camp sets up along a ridge overlooking a vast valley, dotted with olive groves and vineyards. You help unload supplies and prepare for the meal, your fingers stiff but steady. Tonight, the cooks have a special treat, a stew simmering with tender chunks of lamb, wild herbs, and dried apricots. The sweetness of the fruit contrasts with the savory meat, creating a harmony that feels like a reward for all the hardships endured. You watch as the soldiers dip torn bread into the rich broth, soaking up every drop, with a hunger that feels both physical and emotional. Between bites, conversations drift to the distant lands ahead, the mighty cities of Persia, the opulence of Babylon, the mysteries of the East. Someone whispers about exotic spices, rare silks, and foods so foreign they defy description. The talk conjures images of banquets under golden domes, of cooks wielding knives like artists, of flavors that dance on the tongue. You wonder if Alexander has tasted such wonders yet, or if he too lives simply on camp rations, focused on the conquest rather than the cuisine. As night deepens, a bard begins to sing, his voice weaving tales of heroes and gods, of battles won and lost, of journeys that transform men into legends. The melody drifts over the firelight, wrapping the camp in a sense of unity and purpose. You feel it too, a kinship born of shared hardship and fleeting joys, of food and stories, and the endless road ahead. When sleep finally claims you, it is with the taste of lamb stew still lingering on your lips, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new meals, and new memories in this sprawling tapestry of history you are privileged to witness and partake in. The morning air is crisp as you awaken, wrapped in the lingering warmth of your blanket, but shivering slightly as the cold seeps into your bones. Around you, the camp is stirring with a slow, deliberate energy, men stretching, yawning, rubbing, sleep from their eyes as the first pale light seeps over the horizon. The aroma of freshly brewed herbal tea, mint and wild thyme gathered from nearby hills, wafts through the air, a small luxury in this harsh life. You reach for your cup, savoring the bitter warmth, letting it chase away the chill as you prepare for another day on the road. Today, the terrain shifts dramatically as the army descends from the hills into a vast, fertile plain dotted with shimmering lakes and winding rivers. The landscape bursts with green, a sharp contrast to the dust and stone of the mountains you left behind. You notice the birds returning to the marshes, their calls echoing across the water, and the distant hum of insect life, a reminder that this land is alive and abundant. As the men break camp, you watch the cooks assemble the midday meal, a hodgepodge of whatever could be found or carried: roasted wild boar, boiled root vegetables, dried figs, and flatbread so thin it almost resembles a crepe. You tuck into the food gratefully, the gamey richness of the boar complemented by the sweetness of figs, each bite reminding you of the wildness still tethered to this army's march. Between mouthfuls, your thoughts drift to the endless supply chain that keeps this massive force fed and fueled. You think about the merchants and porters who risk bandits and treacherous terrain to bring grain, salted meats, and wine, and the cooks who turn these ingredients into something bearable, even occasionally enjoyable. Food here is not just sustenance, it's a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting you to home and to hope. As the sun climbs higher, the heat intensifies, beating down mercilessly. The men slow their pace, sweat soaking their tunics, faces streaked with dust and exhaustion. You feel the burn of dehydration, gulping water whenever you can, knowing that the rivers here are not always safe to drink from, their currents carrying unseen dangers. Midway through the afternoon, the army stops by a great river, wide and lazy, its waters sparkling under the sun. The men eagerly plunge into the shallows, washing away the grime of travel, cooling their parched skin, and filling water skins for the next stretch. You follow, letting the water rush over your hands and feet, the chill a balm for aching muscles. Nearby, some soldiers gather wild herbs growing along the bank, sage, fennel, and marjoram, to add flavor and freshness to their meals. You admire their resourcefulness, knowing that these small comforts make the endless grind of the campaign more bearable. As evening approaches, the camp settles into a quiet rhythm. Fires are lit, tents pitched hastily but firmly against the cool night air. Tonight's meal is humble but hearty, a stew thick with barley, chunks of dried beef rehydrated and simmered with onions and garlic, seasoned with wild herbs. The aroma draws men close, the promise of warmth and fullness enough to momentarily ease worries of the road ahead. You dip your bread into the stew, savoring the smoky, rich flavors that feel almost like home. Around the fire, stories are exchanged, tales of battles fought, comrades lost, and the glories yet to come. Someone recounts a legend of Hercules, his immense strength and unyielding courage, a reminder of the ideals you and your fellow soldiers strive toward. The mood is somber, yet hopeful, the camaraderie born of shared hardship making the night bearable. As you lay back, the stars sparkling overhead like distant fires, you think about the journey so far and the vast expanse still ahead. You think about Alexander, his vision, his hunger not just for food but for conquest and legacy. You wonder what he dreams of when he closes his eyes, if he too finds solace in the simple pleasures of a warm meal and the company of his men. Tonight, as the camp settles into sleep, you feel a deep connection to this moment, a small but essential thread in the grand tapestry of history unfolding around you. The food, the fire, the stories, they are more than mere survival. They are the pulse of a living army, the heartbeat of an empire in the making. The dawn breaks slowly, spilling pale light over the camp as you stir awake, your muscles stiff, but your spirit steady. The quiet murmur of preparation fills the air, men packing gear, horses neighing softly, the crackle of small fires being rekindled. You pull on your worn tunic, the fabric rough but familiar, and step out into the cool morning. The landscape before you is a mix of rugged hills and sprawling plains, a shifting mosaic of color and texture that promises both challenge and respite. As the army assembles, you notice the ever-present scent of smoke, mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil and crushed herbs. The cooks are already at work, fashioning the first meal of the day, a simple but nourishing porridge made from cracked barley, sweetened with wild honey and dotted with dried fruit. You take a deep breath, savoring the taste and the moment, the fleeting comfort before the day's march resumes. Moving out, the column winds its way through dense forests, the canopy filtering sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The air is cooler here, fresh with the scent of pine and moss. You tread carefully, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, alert for signs of wildlife or enemy scouts. The men around you exchange quiet jokes and stories, a welcome distraction from the monotony and fatigue. Some carry hunting bows, hoping to supplement their rations with game, while others tend to their gear, sharpening blades or mending worn straps. The march is steady, but grueling. Every step feels heavier as the day wears on. Around midday, the army halts near a sparkling stream, the sound of flowing water, a balm to your tired ears. You watch as soldiers eagerly drink and wash, some dipping, cloths to cool their faces, others kneeling to bathe sore feet. The cooks seize the opportunity to gather fresh herbs, wild garlic, mint, and thyme, to enhance the evening meal. You feel a surge of gratitude for these small blessings, knowing that such moments of relief are rare and precious. As the afternoon sun climbs, the heat intensifies, beads of sweat trickling down your face and soaking your clothes. The path grows rougher, winding up a rocky ridge that tests the endurance of even the hardiest men. You steady yourself against a boulder, taking a moment to catch your breath and survey the landscape. Below, the army snakes its way through the valley, a living river of banners, armor, and determination. The sight fills you with a sense of pride and belonging, the knowledge that you are part of something greater than yourself. When the camp finally settles for the night, the mood is subdued but resolute. The cooks prepare a stew thick with lentils, chunks of salted pork, and an array of wild vegetables gathered along the way. You dip your bread eagerly, the rich flavors a welcome contrast to the plain rations of days past. Around the fire, men share tales of home, families left behind, the promise of reunion, and the hope that this arduous journey will soon end in glory. You listen, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on faces worn by battle and fatigue, but brightened by hope. As darkness deepens, you find a quiet spot away from the noise to reflect. The stars wheel overhead in their endless dance, a reminder of the vastness of the world and your place within it. You think about Alexander, his ambition, his vision, and wonder how he carries the weight of leadership and expectation. Do his dreams burn as fiercely as the fires that warm your camp? Does he find moments of peace amid the chaos? You close your eyes, the sounds of the night lulling you towards sleep. The taste of stew still lingers on your tongue, a tangible link to the army's resilience and determination. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new marches, new battles. But for now, you rest, buoyed by the shared strength of those around you and the unyielding spirit that drives you forward. As dawn breaks once again, casting a pale light over the sprawling camp, you awaken to the familiar sounds of rustling canvas and murmuring voices, preparing for the day ahead. The chill of the morning air bites at your skin, yet the stirring activity around you is a warm reassurance that life continues, no matter the hardships faced. Soldiers move about with practiced efficiency, gathering their gear, sharpening weapons, and sharing quick, whispered words of encouragement and warnings. The smell of damp earth mingled with the faint aroma of brewing herbal tea fills the air as campfires are rekindled, and the cooks begin their work, preparing the meager breakfast that sustains you for the miles yet to come. You feel the rough texture of your woolen cloak against your fingers as you rise and stretch, the muscles stiff but ready for the demands of the day. Stepping out of your tent, you catch sight of the vast army, an endless sea of men and horses, banners fluttering in the soft breeze, armor glinting faintly under the growing sunlight. The enormity of the endeavor becomes tangible here, each individual a vital thread woven into the tapestry of conquest that Alexander commands with unwavering resolve. Today's march promises to be arduous. The scouts have reported difficult terrain ahead, steep ravines, dense forests, and unpredictable weather patterns that could slow your advance or test your resolve. Yet, the army moves forward with determination, fueled by a mixture of discipline, hope, and the relentless drive instilled by your king. As you fall into step alongside your comrades, the rhythm of marching feet and clinking equipment becomes a steady pulse, a metronome marking the passage of time and distance. Conversation is sparse, replaced by the steady breathing and occasional coughs of men pushing through exhaustion and discomfort. Thoughts drift to home, to families and loved ones left behind, to the promises made and the sacrifices accepted in the name of glory and survival. The path winds through a landscape both beautiful and foreboding, wildflowers blooming in unexpected patches, twisted trees clawing at the sky, and the distant roar of waterfalls hidden deep within the valleys. Every sight, every sound adds to the surreal nature of this journey, a march not just across lands, but through history itself. Midday brings a break near a fast-flowing river, its cold waters a refreshing balm for your tired limbs. Soldiers spread out to drink, wash, and, momentarily, shed the weight of armor and weapons. You dip your hands into the clear stream, letting the water run over your wrists and face, feeling briefly renewed. Lunch is a simple affair. More bread, cheese if you're lucky, and dried fruit pressed into your palm by a fellow soldier who smiles with the camaraderie born of shared hardship. The conversation picks up, stories exchanged about previous battles, strange customs encountered, and the rumors swirling about the next phases of the campaign. You listen intently, aware that information true or false, shapes morale and sharpens focus. The afternoon sun climbs high, its heat oppressive beneath your helmet and mail. The march continues, slower now, as fatigue weighs heavier on every man and beast. The ground becomes rocky and uneven, challenging your footing and resolve. At times you must help a struggling comrade, lending strength when his own falters. The bond between soldiers growing stronger in these moments of shared vulnerability. The landscape shifts as you ascend higher, the air thinner and cooler, the vistas breathtaking despite the strain. From this vantage point, you glimpse the vastness of the world Alexander seeks to claim, a sprawling mosaic of mountains, forests, and rivers stretching beyond the horizon. It is a humbling reminder of the scale of your mission and the indomitable spirit required to see it through. Evening falls with a suddenness that surprises you, the fading light prompting renewed urgency to set up camp. The work is swift and practiced, tents erected, fires lit, and sentries posted to guard against the ever-present threat of enemy ambush or wild beasts. Dinner is modest but vital, a stew of lentils and dried meat, bread, and a ration of watered wine passed carefully among the men. As you eat, the chatter around the fire ebbs and flows, tales of courage and folly, legends of heroes past, and hopes for the future shared in the flickering firelight. You find yourself drawn into a conversation with an older soldier who speaks of battles long ago, the cost of ambition, and the thin line between glory and ruin. His words resonate, a sobering counterpoint to the youthful zeal that burns in many hearts here. As night deepens, you lie back on your bedroll, muscles aching, but spirit steadfast. The stars above shine cold and indifferent, yet in their constellations you find stories, guides for navigation, reminders of home, and symbols of the vastness beyond. Sleep comes slowly, chased by thoughts of what tomorrow holds. A new march, new challenges, and the relentless pursuit of a dream that has already reshaped the world. In this quiet moment, you understand that your journey is not just one of conquest, but of endurance, brotherhood, and the fragile hope that through struggle, something lasting and profound can be forged. As the first light of dawn stretches across the horizon, you awaken to a world cloaked in mist and anticipation. The camp stirs with the soft murmur of preparation. Soldiers shake off sleep and ready their gear for another demanding day. Cold air bites at your skin, a sharp reminder of the harsh environment in which you now find yourself, far from the sun-warmed plains of Macedonia. You pull your cloak tighter and take a deep breath, steeling yourself for the march ahead. Today's journey promises new challenges. The scouts have reported treacherous marshlands ahead, a stark contrast to the rugged hills and rocky paths you've been crossing. The ground is expected to be soft and unstable, slowing your progress and taxing both men and horses. Yet the army moves with resolve, a massive force bound by discipline, loyalty, and the shared purpose instilled by Alexander. As you fall in line among the ranks, the rhythmic cadence of marching feet and the metallic clinks of armor set a steady tempo that both soothes and drives forward. Conversation is minimal. Many soldiers conserve their strength, eyes fixed on the path or lost in thought. The stories and songs that once filled the night give way to the sound of steady breathing and the occasional cough or grunt. Your mind drifts to the distant lands you've left behind and the unknown territories that await, a mixture of fear and excitement swelling within you. The landscape is muted under the grey sky, the thick mist wrapping trees and rocks in an eerie embrace. Visibility is poor, forcing greater vigilance as the army navigates the soggy terrain. Horses struggle to find footing, and you often lend a hand to steady a rider or help a beast recover from a stumble. The march slows considerably, turning what would normally be hours of steady progress into a test of patience and endurance. Around midday, the army breaks near a small cluster of trees, their twisted branches barely shielding you from the damp air. The cooks quickly assemble a meal of hard bread, salted meat, and a thin broth that warms, but hardly satisfies. You eat, quietly, mindful of conserving energy, yet grateful for the brief respite. Conversations resume tentatively, punctuated by remarks on the difficulty of the terrain and speculation about what lies beyond. One soldier recounts a tale of an earlier campaign, describing a nightmarish swamp filled with unseen dangers, while another shares a more hopeful story of a friendly village, where they once found fresh water and fruit. The meal ends with a ration of watered wine passed around, a small comfort in the bleak surroundings. The afternoon march begins anew, the ground sucking at your boots, and the low hum of insects filling the air. The oppressive moisture clings to your skin, and the chill seeps into your bones despite the exertion. You find yourself longing for the dry heat of home, the sharp flavors of olives and fresh bread, and the comforting laughter of friends. Yet, there is no turning back. The army presses onward, step by heavy step, until the marsh gives way to firmer ground near a wide river. Here, the soldiers pause once more to rest, drink, and prepare for what comes next. You take advantage of the break to wash the grime from your face and hands, the cool water a brief relief against the lingering dampness. Around you, men exchange news, share rumors, and recount moments of bravery and folly. The camaraderie, fragile yet essential, is a lifeline amid the unrelenting march. As the sun begins to lower, casting long shadows across the land, the camp settles into its evening routine. Tents are pitched swiftly, fires lit, and sentries posted to watch for dangers lurking in the dark. Dinner is a simple stew, lentils thickened with dried vegetables and small chunks of meat, served with dense barley bread that crunches under your teeth. You eat with the others, the conversation subdued but comforting. Stories of home mix with hopes for the future, and the shared hardships forge bonds that transcend the weariness. As the fire flickers low and the stars emerge in the clear night sky, you lie back on your bedroll, muscles aching but heart steady. The vastness above reminds you of the journey's scale, how small you are in this sprawling world, yet how significant your role in the unfolding saga. Sleep finally claims you, carrying dreams of distant lands, the faces of comrades, and the relentless march that defines this moment in history. The morning sun rises over the camp, casting a warm golden glow on the faces of weary soldiers and the worn equipment that tells stories of countless battles and long marches. You awaken, feeling the stiffness in your limbs from yesterday's grueling trek through the marshlands, but there's no time to rest. Today promises yet another chapter in the epic tale you're living, an expedition stretching further into lands unknown, into cultures strange and untamed. As you pack up your belongings, the scent of freshly baked bread mingles with the earthy aroma of damp soil and campfire smoke, a familiar but never quite comforting combination. The camp bustles with the energy of preparation, men checking weapons, horses being fed and watered, officers conferring in hushed tones about the route ahead. The tension is palpable. Even the bravest among you know that the farther you push, the more unpredictable the challenges become. Alexander, ever the commanding presence, rides through the lines on his majestic steed, offering a nod or brief word to the soldiers, his eyes sharp and filled with purpose. The camaraderie you felt the night before lingers, but is tempered by the awareness that the campaign tests not only your physical endurance, but your spirit. As you join the march, the landscape begins to shift gradually. Dense forests give way to rocky outcroppings and hills that rise like silent sentinels. The air grows thinner, cooler, and carries the faint scent of pine and wildflowers, a reminder that nature is both ally and adversary on this journey. The steady drumbeat of boots against earth blends with the distant call of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Conversation among the ranks is sparse. Many soldiers focus inward, conserving energy and preparing for the unknown. Occasionally, a joke or story breaks the silence, a fragile thread of normalcy amid the relentless push forward. You find your thoughts drifting to home, visions of sunlit olive groves, the laughter of family, the taste of fresh figs and honey, and a pang of longing stirs deep within you. But those comforts are distant now, replaced by the present reality of survival, duty, and the promise of glory. Midday brings a halt near a clear mountain stream where the men eagerly drink and refill their flasks. The cooks quickly prepare a meal of smoked fish, coarse bread, and a pungent cheese that bites at your tongue but fills your belly. Around the fire, the mood lightens as stories circulate. Tales of Alexander's exploits, whispered rumors of treasures beyond the horizon, and the persistent hope that the end of this march will bring rest and reward. The afternoon stretches long and tiring as you ascend the rocky slopes, muscles burning with exertion. The path narrows, forcing columns to move single file, and you're keenly aware of the precariousness beneath your boots. Every step demands focus. Every breath feels sharper in the thinning air. The landscape is breathtaking yet unforgiving, with jagged cliffs plunging into valleys shrouded in mist. At times, the sense of isolation is overwhelming. No sign of civilization, No friendly voices, just the wind and the distant echoes of your company. Yet, Alexander rides ahead undeterred, his vision clear and unwavering. As dusk approaches, the army descends to a sheltered valley where tents are pitched quickly. The evening meal is a sparse stew, flavored with wild herbs and small game caught by the scouts. The fires crackle, casting flickering shadows that dance over tired faces and glinting weapons. Soldiers share what little warmth and humor they can, muster, bolstering each other against the fatigue and uncertainty. You listen to a fellow soldier's tale of a near encounter with mountain wolves, a story that elicits nervous laughter and a reminder of the ever-present dangers beyond human foes. Night deepens, and the camp settles into uneasy rest. You lie beneath the stars, muscles aching, mind racing with thoughts of the road yet to travel and the fate that awaits you all. The silence is broken only by the soft murmur of a nearby sentry, and the occasional hoot of an owl, reminders that the wilderness watches and waits. Sleep comes fitfully, but you welcome it nonetheless, a temporary reprieve in this relentless march toward history. As dawn breaks on the final day of this long and arduous campaign, the air feels charged with a strange mix of exhaustion, anticipation, and something deeper, something like the weight of history pressing down on every step you take. The soldiers move with tired limbs but determined hearts, knowing this day could change everything. The landscape opens up before you, rolling plains stretching to the horizon, dotted with unfamiliar villages and ancient ruins whispering stories of civilizations past. The sun climbs steadily, casting long shadows and igniting the earth with golden heat, and you feel the heat prick at your skin beneath your worn armor. Breakfast is a brief affair, some bread, dried fruit, and a weak broth that barely registers on your palate, but fuel enough to keep moving. Alexander rides at the front, eyes scanning the horizon, a leader as relentless as the march itself. His presence is a constant reminder of why you endure, not just for survival, but for glory, for conquest, for a place in the story that will outlive you all. The road takes you past fields where peasants labor under the harsh sun, eyes wary, but curious, as your army passes like a living storm. Children peek from behind crumbling walls, and elders nod with a mix of resignation and hope. You wonder what they think of this vast army cutting through their lands, what tales they will tell when you are gone. Midday brings a pause near a shallow river, its clear waters a welcome relief. The men drink deeply, wash the grime from their faces and hands, and rest briefly in the shade of gnarled trees. The cooks serve a simple meal, roasted fowl, rough bread, and wild berries gathered by scouts. Around the campfires, conversation drifts from the hardships endured to dreams of the spoils ahead, cities to plunder, treasures to claim, names to carve into the annals of time. But beneath the bravado, there is a quiet undercurrent of fear. The unknown stretches before you, vast and unpredictable, and the thought of defeat or betrayal lingers like a shadow. As afternoon fades into evening, the army reaches a sprawling encampment that will serve as the staging ground for the next phase of the campaign. Tents rise like a small city, flags flutter in the cooling breeze, and the hum of activity fills the air. Blacksmiths forging weapons, scribes recording orders, musicians tuning their instruments. Tonight, for the first time in weeks, there is talk of a proper feast. You find yourself among the soldiers gathered around a large fire, the aroma of roasting meats mingling with the rich scent of herbs and wine. Laughter and song echo under the stars as men celebrate their survival and the bonds forged through shared hardship. Alexander appears among you, more relaxed than usual, sharing stories and toasts, his eyes gleaming with pride and vision. The soul. Food is simple but hearty. Succulent lamb, fresh bread, cheeses, and the cherished wine, no longer diluted, flowing freely. You savor each bite, each sip, feeling for a moment that all the struggles were worth it. As the night deepens, the camp quiets and you retreat to your tent, full and contemplative. You reflect on the journey, the endless miles, the fierce battles, the fleeting moments of camaraderie and hope. The world feels both vast and small, filled with possibilities and dangers. Sleep comes easily now, wrapped in the warmth of shared dreams and the promise of tomorrow's challenges. This final night is not an end, but a pause, a moment to gather, strength before the next chapter of history unfolds. And as you close your eyes, you know that no matter what comes next, you have been part of something extraordinary. The March of Alexander the Great, a story that will echo through time long after the fires have died and the armies have marched on.